resource persons.
Mr. Chairman, in today's meeting, we have the following members present today in plenary. Deputy Speaker Dan Fernandez, Deputy Speaker Marcoleta, Deputy Majority Leader Mikey Arroyo, Senior Deputy Majority Leader Jesus Crispin Remulla, Minority Leader Benny Abante, Deputy Minority Leader Carlo Zarate, Representatives Elpidio Barzaga, Micaela Violago, Franz Castro, our Vice Chairperson of the Committee on Good Government and Public Accountability, Representative Michael Defensor, and Representative Eric Goyap. Joining us in Zoom, we have, of course, the Chairperson of the Committee on Legislative Franchises, Chairman Franz Alvarez, Representative Acosta, Honorable Representative Jose Atienza, Joy Tambunting, Raymond D.C. Mendoza, Representative Erico Pineda, Deputy Speaker Rosemary Arenas, Representatives Josephine Ramirez Sato, Chodorico Jaresco, Sol Aragones, Deputy Speaker Evelina Escudero, Representatives Along Malapitan, Maricel Natividad Algaño, Rufus Rodriguez, Ino D., Adrian Ebcas, Deputy Speaker Rosa Vilma Santos Recto, Representative Faustino Michael D., Pingping Tejada, Ace Barbers, Stephen Paduano, Rolando Bariliano, Cesar Joao Jimenez, Angela Barba, Ann Hofer, Edsel Lagman, Alfred De Los Santos, Jared Gullas, Sandro Gonzalez, Mike Aglipay, Alfred Vargas, Gabriel Bordado Jr., Jericho Nograles, Mike Aglipay, Stella Kimbo, Francisco Datol, Divine Grace Yu, Marco, Lawrence Fortune, Deputy Speaker Roby Puno, Deputy Speaker Didi Sabaliano. We also have the Senior Minority Leader Jen Garin, Representative Tony Pet Albano, Onyx Crisologo, Edward Maceda, Alfredo Garbin, Eliza Shienatan, Joaquin Chipeco, Cyril Abueg Saldivar, and Representative Jericho Jonas Nogales. Your Honors. For guests.
Maraming salamat, Comsec.
Mr. Chairman,
Sa bahagi po ng House Blue Ribbon Committee, known as the Committee on Good Government and Public Accountability, binabati po natin ang ating mga kasamahan na nasa plenary at nasa Zoom. Gayon din po ang ating mga resource persons na nasa Zoom at mga kawani ng ABS-CBN na kasama natin ngayon dito sa Session Hall. Sa kaalaman po muli ng lahat, tayo po ay napapanood by live stream sa Facebook ng House of Representatives. Comsec, please recognize our resource persons for today.
Before that, we want to recognize the presence via Zoom of Representative Pablo Jan Garcia. For our guests this afternoon, we have from Securities and Exchange Commission via Zoom, Commissioner Epairo Luis Amatong, General Counsel Romuald Padilla, Attorney Erwin Edward Mendinueto, Chief Counsel, SEC MSRD, and Director Vicente Graciano Pilismeño, Jr. From the Philippine Stock Exchange, we have Attorney Roel Refran, COO, and Attorney Veronica Del Rosario, General Counsel. From the Department of Justice via Zoom, we have Assistant Secretary Nicolas Felix T. From the NTC, we have Commissioner Gamaliel Cordova and Deputy Commissioner Edgardo Caballos here in the plenary. Office of the Solicitor General, we have Sergeant Jose Calida. From the ABS-CBN, we have Mr. Martin Lopez, Chairman, Mr. Carlo Katigbak, President and CEO, Mr. Coro Vidanes, COO for Broadcast, Mr. Raymond Miranda, Chief Strategy Officer, Mr. Ricardo Tan, Group CFO, Attorney Enrique Quiazon, Corporate Secretary, Attorney Cynthia Del Castillo, Attorney Herminio Zaita, and Attorney Cherry Cruz. Via Zoom, we have Attorney Mario Bautista, General Counsel, and Ms. Consuelo Lopez, Chief of Staff. From former employees of ABS-CBN, observing today, Mr. Jaime Concepcion, Mr. Reparado Galos Jr., Mr. Reynaldo Tugade, and Mr. Tauser Bansonan. That's all.
Salamat po, Sec. Ngayong hapon, atin pong itutuloy ang pagtatanong ng mga issues sa ugnay sa aligasyong paglabag sa Konstitusyon, particularly whether or not ABS-CBN sold PDRs to foreigners, which allowed ABS-CBN to be owned by non-Filipinos, a violation of 100% ownership in mass media. Sasagot po ang ABS-CBN sa katanungan ng ating mga members tungkol sa PDRs. Gayun din po ang mga resource persons mula sa SEC, DOJ, NDC at SOLGED na nasa Zoom ngayon, upang lalo at nating maintindihan kung ano nga ba ang PDRs. Meron pong mahigit na 30 na membro natin na nagpahayag sa kanilang mga gustuhan na magtanong. Atin na pong reminder na meron na po tayong 5 minutes per interpolator po.
Mr. Chairman. Yes, Vice Chairman Mike Defensor.
Mr. Chairman, before we proceed with the deliberations, I just want to put on record that we are not sure of the suspension or adjournment of the last meeting, but having said that, I move that we approve the minute of the last session and of today's meeting in the next committee hearing, Mr. Chairman.
Second motion.
There's a motion, duly seconded, hearing no objections. Motion is carried. Pinahalagahan ng Blue Ribbon Committee ang pagdinig na ito na naglalayong matukoy ang katotohanan at nang masagot ang aligasyon sa paglabag nga ba ng ABS-CBN sa ating saligang batas. Nang magbenta ito ng PDR sa mga banyaga at pinahintulutan di umano ang mga hindi Pilipino na magmay-ari ng ABS-CBN. Dahil dito, inaasahan natin na magiging substantial ang ating deliberasyon ngayong araw na ito at upang ating masaayos ang diskusyon at pagtatanong, amin pong hinihiling sa ating mga kasapi at kalahok na kung sakali na naitanong na sa ABS-CBN ay huwag na po ulitin muli ang pagtatanong. Pangalawa, sana po ay maging magalang tayo sa bawat isa at iwasan po natin ang mga unparliamentary remarks at palitaliin natin ang respeto sa bawat miyembro ng komiting ito at ang ating mga panauhin. Maraming salamat po.
Bago tayo tumungo sa interpellation, meron po yata manifestation ng ABS-CBN. So, sa ABS-CBN, sino po yung representative na gagawa ng manifestation? You are recognized.
Mr. Chair, may I request that Attorney Cynthia Del Castillo be allowed to provide the committee a brief statement on the PDRs. Attorney Del Castillo is the pioneer of PDRs, having been involved in the structure of PDRs used by both ABS-CBN and GMA. She is the head of securities law for the law firm Bawal Lumabas and was dean of the Ateneo Law School from 1990 to 2000. Attorney Del Castillo is counsel for ABS-CBN. Mr. Chair, can I request that Attorney Del Castillo be sworn in and recognized, please?
The committee secretary is hereby directed to execute the oath
Stand up na rin.
for Attorney Del Castillo.
Please raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth before this joint congressional hearing, so help you God? Thank you.
Sige po, maaari na po kayo magpatuloy. Pakipindot po.
Yeah. Magandang hapon po sa inyong lahat. Salamat po sa pagdinig na ito. Kung mamarapatin niyo po, mag-uumpisa ako by going back to the time that the ABS-CBN Holdings PDRs were issued in 1999. Kung matatandaan niyo po, at that time, the Philippines, together with its Asian neighbors, were all reeling from the effect of the Asian financial crisis in 1997. So our capital market was really very much affected. The gains that we have realized in the early 1990s were all eroded. So we had a lot of companies that needed financing, but the traditional sources of financing like equity and debt were all inadequate at that point in time. Banks were not lending, and if they were on very steep grounds. So this is the milieu when the PDRs were introduced in the Philippines. Hindi po ito bago or novel. This is something that has been used in other financial markets at may counterparts po ito in other countries, including of course the American depository receipts. So this was supposed to be very convenient and beneficial to most companies in the Philippines. First, for the reason na you don't have to partake or to dispose of your ownership in order to raise financing. In the same manner, it is beneficial. This is better than debt because if it is a debt, then you have to pay the principal and interest regardless of the performance of the underlying shares or the shares that you use to secure your obligation. So this is something that was both beneficial to the capital market, to the companies that needed financing, as well as, of course, to the government. So as far as the capital market of the Philippines was concerned, it did perk up the market because of additional securities that were floated and being sold in the market. On the part of the Philippine government, it was increased economic activity for a lot of companies. That, of course, translates to additional collection of taxes. Ang aligasyon po ay ang PDRs ng ABS-CBN Holdings are violative of the Philippine Constitution. Kung matatandaan po natin, the provision that really covers mass media is found in Section 11, Paragraph 1, Article 16 of the Philippine Constitution. Ang sinasabi po nito is that the ownership and management of mass media shall be limited to citizens of the Philippines and to corporations, cooperatives, or associations wholly owned and managed by such citizens. So dalawa lang po ang pinagbabawal. You have ownership and management of mass media companies. Against this test, the question that we ask is whether or not the ABS-CBN Holdings PDRs allow the participation of foreign nationals in the ownership and management of a mass media company. So from the very outset, gusto ko po lamang idiin na magkaiba po ang ABS-CBN Holdings Company sa ABS-CBN Broadcasting Corporation. Yung holdings po own shares in ABS-CBN Broadcasting. Hindi lang po ABS-CBN Holdings ang may-ari ng shares ng ABS Broadcasting dahil marami pong ibang shareholders ang ABS-CBN Broadcasting. It is broadcasting that is engaged in mass media. ABS-CBN Holdings is a purely holding company. Ang activity po nito, because it is a holding company, is just to invest in shares. So in this case, the PDRs were issued by ABS-CBN Holdings to investors under the terms of what we call the PDR instrument. This is a contract po between the investors of the PDRs and the issuer, who is ABS-CBN Holdings Corporation. This contractual arrangement has nothing to do with ABS-CBN Broadcasting. Because ang parties po ng kontratang ito, which is covered under the PDR instrument, are the investors and ABS-CBN Holdings. Hindi po parties sa PDR instrument ang ABS-CBN Broadcasting. Ang only link po, if you can call it a link, is that ang PDR investors po, when they invest in the PDRs, they track the performance of the ABS-CBN Broadcasting kasi doon po nanggagaling ang kita ng ABS-CBN Holdings. Being a holding company, it only derives income through its ownership in other companies in the form of dividends and other distributions from its investments. So yun lang po, kasi kung mag-i-invest sila sa PDRs, they have to know kung anong value ng PDRs, and that was dependent on the performance of the underlying shares. Pero wala po silang pakialam sa ABS-CBN Broadcasting. Hindi po sila partido sa PDR instrument, which is the contract between the investors and ABS-CBN Holdings. Wala pong, as we call it in legal terms, wala pong privity of relationship. So kung hindi man po tumupad ang ABS-CBN Holdings sa kanyang mga obligasyones under the PDR instrument, wala pong right ang PDR holders to proceed against ABS-CBN Broadcasting. So ang tanong po lamang is, does the investment of foreign nationals in the PDRs issued by ABS-CBN Holdings violate the Philippine Constitution? Your answer to this can be yes. Investors own shares, which is the test of ownership, or they do participate in the management of ABS-CBN Broadcasting. At ang sabi ko po kanina, magkaiba po ang dalawang korporasyon na to. Wala pong pakialam ang mga investors sa ownership at sa management ng ABS-CBN Broadcasting Company. Ang rights po ng PDR holders are only against ABS-CBN Holdings, hindi po against ABS-CBN Broadcasting, and wala po silang rights, whether of ownership or management, of the mass media corporation, which is ABS-CBN Holdings Broadcasting Company. So, para po malinawan kung ano itong mga PDRs na to, there are tests that are employed to determine whether there is a violation of the Philippine Constitution. The first test is the test of ownership, and secondly, of management. So whether they have ownership rights over the mass media company, that is ABS-CBN Broadcasting Corporation, we should really understand the nature of the PDRs. PDRs are purely financial instruments. Hindi po siya shares, hindi po siya nakakaboto sa ABS-CBN Broadcasting, at hindi po siya nakakapag-participate sa management ng ABS-CBN Broadcasting. So in this case, being a financial instrument, ang only expectation po ng investors in PDRs would be, of course, whatever cash distribution and gains they can derive in the trading and transfer of ownership of the PDRs. So, akin pong inuulit, ang ownership po nila ay sa PDRs, hindi po sa shares ng ABS-CBN Broadcasting. Wala po silang right to participate in the management of ABS-CBN Broadcasting because hindi po sila shareholders nito, and they have no rights whatsoever, whether granted by way of contract, arrangement, or any form of understanding, to participate in the voting as shareholders or to direct or cause the voting of the shares in ABS-CBN Broadcasting. So as far as the Philippine regulatory agencies are concerned, this has been recognized by the Securities and Exchange Commission as something which is different from the shares of ABS-CBN Broadcasting, because it has approved the registration of ABS-CBN Holdings PDRs and ABS-CBN Broadcasting shares. Magkaiba po sila. They have separate registrations, they have separate trading, and because these PDRs have also been listed and traded in the Philippine Stock Exchange. So pwede po kayong bumili ng ABS-CBN shares sa stock market, pwede din kayong bumili ng PDRs ng ABS-CBN Holdings sa stock market. Magkaiba po silang dalawa. There is no transfer of rights from the shareholders of ABS-CBN Broadcasting to the PDR holders. Because of these separate and distinct characters, the owners of the PDRs na inisyu po ng ABS-CBN Holdings ay hindi po pwedeng sabihin na may-ari ng shares ng ABS-CBN Broadcasting Corporation. So for the owners of ABS-CBN broadcasting shares, such as ABS-CBN Holdings, ang requirement po ng ating batas at ng mga interpretasyon ng ating mga desisyon ng Korte Suprema is that they should have full beneficial interest in the mass media company para po maging compliant with the Philippine Constitution. The full beneficial interest test was employed by, of course, the two well-known cases dealing with nationalization and citizenship. Ito po yung kaso ni Gamboa at ang kaso ni Roy versus Herbosa. Simple lang po ang pagka-discuss sa case ng Roy versus Herbosa. You have rights to participate in the ownership of the mass media company only if the shares have been assigned to you or the voting rights have been assigned to you. Hindi po yan binigay sa PDR holders. Ang bumoboto po ng mga shares ay ang ABS-CBN Holdings, hindi po ang investors ng PDRs. So, hindi po talaga pwedeng sabihin that they are owners of shares or equity in the mass media company, which is a restricted business insofar as the Constitution is concerned. Yung other test po, apart from ownership, in the case of full beneficial ownership, ay yung pong right ng PDR holders to receive dividends and other fruits and accessions. Ang sabi po ni Roy versus Herbosa, kung ikaw ay entitled to receive the dividends from the mass media company or any forms of profits, accessions, or fruits, then the beneficial ownership lies in the PDR holders and not in the owner of the shares. Wala pong ganong assignment ang PDR instrument na ibinibigay ang right to dividends and any fruits or accessions to the PDR holders. What they are entitled to would be cash distribution from ABS-CBN Holdings Corporation. Yung cash distribution po, pwede pong manggaling at in most cases nanggagaling din sa dividendo ng ABS-CBN. Pero ang the one entitled to those dividends ay hindi ang ABS-CBN Holdings PDR holders, but ABS-CBN Holdings. So para po niyang ni-receive, the one entitled, because this is a shareholder right, the one entitled is ABS-CBN Holdings. Hindi po niya ina-assign ang kanyang rights to dividends to the PDR holders. Ang kanya lang pong commitment is that pagkatapos kung makareceive ng income, and because this is a holding company and income is derived from their ownership or investment in shares, I will get my operating expenses, I will get the amount that I need for my taxes, I will need the amount that I need to discharge my loans, at kung may sobra, those are the ones that will be distributed in the form of cash distribution to the PDR holders. Kung for any reason po ABS-CBN Holdings does not do this and does not pay the PDR holders, the right of action of PDR holders is against ABS-CBN Holdings and not against ABS-CBN Broadcasting Corporation. Even if ABS-CBN Broadcasting Corporation earns a lot of profits, even if it accumulates a lot of profits, wala pong right ang PDR holders to compel the declaration of those dividends kasi hindi po sila shareholders. Ang kanila lang inaasahan ay ang distribution ng ABS-CBN Holdings pagkatapos nitong bayaran ang lahat ng kanyang pangangailangan at kung may sobra man po ay yun ang i-distribute sa PDR holders. So as far as the issuance of the PDRs are concerned, the PDR instrument does not transfer any voting rights, especially for the right to vote directors. Kung matatandaan niyo po, the case of Gamboa versus Teves, yung mahaba-habang desisyon ni Justice Carpio, ang kanila pong pinag-usapan lang is ano ba ang control na pinagbabawal ng Constitution. The control na pinagbabawal ng Constitution is the control and more principally the power to elect the directors. Bakit po just the vote on the directors? Kasi the vote on directors is crucial in the sense that it is the board of directors that control the affairs of the corporation and they are the ones that manage the corporation. So anyone who has the power to vote directors has control over the corporation. Wala pong ganong right ang PDR holders. Wala po silang right to vote the directors. Wala rin po silang right to direct ABS-CBN to vote in any particular way, including, of course, the voting in the case of the election of directors. Ang PDR holders po are what we call passive investors. Hindi po sila nakikialam sa ownership and management. The commitments of ABS-CBN Holdings is really just to make cash distribution. Because it is a financial instrument, ang expectation lang ay financial rewards. So they can do this two ways. Dahil po listed ang PDRs ng ABS-CBN Holdings, they can trade those PDRs in the market. And they can have, of course, gains arising from the trading of their PDRs. The other way is, of course, wait for the cash distribution insofar as ABS-CBN Holdings are concerned. So the dividends received by ABS-CBN Holdings from ABS-CBN Broadcasting Corporation are those that are relied upon by the PDR holders. Pero hindi po ito pass-through. Some people are saying it is a pass-through. Hindi po ito pass-through. Kasi para po yung ni-receive ko, kung ako ay shareholder ng isang kumpanya, ni-receive ko yan, sa akin po yung dividendo na yon. And after paying all my expenses and all my obligations, I can commit to give the balance to anyone. Kasi sa akin po yun. Ako ang may-ari ng mga dividendo. And that is exactly what happens in the case of the PDR holders. So, as I said previously, kung hindi po yan bayaran ng ABS-CBN Holdings, hindi po sila pwede magdemanda against ABS-CBN Broadcasting Corporation because wala po silang right to proceed against ABS-CBN Broadcasting directly. Kung hindi po sila satisfied sa kanilang investments, wala po yung direct action against the mass media company. Pwede nilang ibenta yung kanilang PDRs or pwede nilang i-exercise yung exercise rights, which is, of course, to acquire the shares kung sila ay qualified, kung sila ay Filipino, at kung hindi man, na ang kanilang right lang ay to obtain the proceeds of the sale of those shares. So as you can see, there is no direct link to the shares of ABS-CBN Broadcasting Company. So all of these factors that I have discussed only point to one fact. The PDRs have a life of its own. Hindi po yan naka-attach sa shares ng ABS-CBN Broadcasting. They trade independently. There are financial and cash distributions which are separately given by ABS-CBN Holdings. At sila po ay hindi talaga magkapareho. I think the confusion in the layman's eyes is always na parang magkapareho yung PDR holders at yung shareholders ng ABS-CBN Broadcasting Corporation. Magkaiba po kasi ang ABS-CBN Holdings is a shareholder of ABS-CBN Broadcasting. The PDR holders are owners of financial instruments issued by ABS-CBN Holding Company. The other issue po is yung management ng mass media companies. So, meron bang right ang mga PDR holders to participate in the management of ABS-CBN Broadcasting, which is the mass media company? Wala po, because the management lies and is under the control of the board of directors of ABS-CBN Broadcasting Corporation. Hindi po sila shareholders. Neither were they given any right in the PDR instrument to cause the election of the board of directors or to cause the voting in one way or another of the shares owned by ABS-CBN Holdings. They do not have the power to vote and certainly do not have the power to vote directors. Pwede po ba silang ma-appoint in management positions? Kung talaga pong qualified, pwede naman pong ma-appoint in management positions. But the fact na meron silang PDR is not their entitlement to be appointed or elected to management positions of the mass media company. if they so happen to be PDR directors, PDR holders, and they're foreign nationals, and they do participate or appointed in management positions, hindi po yan dahil sa PDRs. Because the PDRs do not have any right to be appointed, elected as directors, or appointed to management positions. At ang isa pong naming gustong sabihin is, yung ABS-CBN Holdings PDRs ay registered po sa Securities and Exchange Commission under our securities regulations. They are also listed in the Philippine Stock Exchange. And if you know the scrutiny that this government agency and market authority does in doing registration and the listing, you will know that this company, ABS-CBN Holdings, subjected itself to the full scrutiny, review, regulation, and supervision of the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Philippine Stock Exchange. Kung meron po silang ginagawang kalokohan or circumvention of the Philippine Constitution, they would not subject themselves to this kind of scrutiny. Because lahat naman po ng ginagawa ng ABS-CBN Holdings as issuer of PDRs ay dinidisclose naman po to this government agency and market authority. Hindi po sila nagtatago ng kahit ano because this is their obligation under the law to make material disclosures. In issuing all of these securities, ang ABS-CBN po Holdings have, in good faith, complied with all the requirements of the government regulatory agencies that have jurisdiction over
Mr.
them.
Chairman.
Yes, Vice Chairman Rimulya.
The presentation seems to be very long. Are they winding up already or
Yeah.
mahaba pa?
Salamat po.
Ma'am, gaano kahaba pa po yung
I'm closing na po.
Yes, ma'am. Please continue.
So I just want to close by saying that their acts are all above board. They have relied on the approvals and the permits and licenses issued by the Securities Exchange Commission and the Philippine Stock Exchange. If for any reason those decisions are wrong and the courts declare that they are wrong, we have po in good faith relied on them. So it's going to cause some effect on the Philippine capital market dahil po it will erode the investors' confidence in decisions made by these government agencies and market regulation authority. So yun lang po ang gusto naming sabihin na wala po kami itinatago. We have not circumvented the Philippine Constitution and all the terms and conditions of the PDRs have been fully disclosed and of course evaluated by the government agencies and the market authority. Marami pong
Mr. Chairman.
salamat.
Thank you.
Marami pong salamat.
Tapos na po kayo, ma'am.
Tapos na po.
Maraming salamat po.
po.
At in the spirit of fairness po, sa espiritu po ng pagkakapantay-pantay para sa mga pro-ABS at sa anti-ABS, ay magkakaroon naman po tayo ng counter presentation na para po sa usapin ng PDRs na gagampanan po ni Vice Chairman Mike Defensor.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Vice Chairman Rimulya.
I just want to qualify the witness because we allowed the witness to speak without much introduction. Diretso na po sa usapan tungkol sa PDR. Pwede ko po i-qualify ng kaunti lang.
Papayagan po kita.
Tatanungin ko lang po siya sa background at lahat. Hindi naman humahaba eh. Tatanungin ko para
Sige
I
po.
want to satisfy myself that she is a competent witness
1
in
minute.
this hearing.
1 minute, Vice Chairman Rimulya.
Attorney Del Castillo, abogado po kayo ng ABS-CBN.
Opo.
Kaya nagsasalita po kayo bilang abogado ng ABS-CBN.
Opo.
At sa inyong pagsasabi sa amin, hindi ko kayo humaharap dito bilang para sa taxpayer, kundi para sa ABS-CBN na nagbabayad ng inyong attorney's fee.
Ang participation po namin dito ay as counsel of ABS-CBN.
As counsel of ABS-CBN, kayo rin po ang nag-design ng PDR.
Hindi po yan inimbento. Dahil po ang PDRs ay may counterparts po yan in either financial market. Kami lang po ang unang nag-introduce sa Pilipinas.
So
Kaya
kayo
hindi
po ang
namin-
advisor nila, kayo po ang nag-advisor ng ABS-CBN tungkol sa PDR.
Opo.
Kaya pa nagsasalita kayo dito sa harap namin, expected po, sasabihin niyo walang mali kasi kayo po yung abogado ng ina-examine dito. Siyempre ho, di ba ho?
Pero obligasyon din po ng abogado na bago niya sabihin yun, i-review po niya.
Pero yun nga, ang ibig ko sabihin po, ang pinag-uusapan natin, kayo ho may akda, kaya ang sinasabi niyo sa amin, walang mali sa inyong ginawa. Tama ho ba yun?
Opo, at yun po ay kumpirmado.
Salamat po,
naman.
salamat po.
Thank you, Vice Chairman Remulla. Yes, Congressman Barsaga.
Mungkahi lamang kagalang-galang, Chairman.
Sige po.
Pwede bang makahingi tayo ng hard copy ng sinabi ni Dean Castillo? Kasi it's a little bit complicated and definitely her dissertation will be considered by the members of this committee in the deliberation whether or not we shall grant or not the franchise of ABS-CBN.
Thank you, Congressman Barsaga. The committee secretary is hereby directed to
Mr.
give
Chairman.
the copy of the manifestation of Attorney Del Castillo to all members.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Congresswoman Biolago.
thank you, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon. I just want to clarify kung tama po ba ang dinig ko kay attorney na yung kita ng ABS Holding came from ABS-CBN Corporation?
Opo, kasi po they own shares.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Congresswoman Biolago. And without further ado, I give the floor to Vice Chairman Mike Defensor to give the counter presentation about PDRs.
Maraming salamat, Chairman Alvarado, sa ating pong mga guests sa ABS-CBN, sa aking mga kasama na nandito. Una po sa lahat, gusto ko lang pong linawin na wala naman pong pro o anti dito, Mr. Chairman. Importante lang po na tanungin namin ang tamang mga tanong, malaman namin ang katotohanan, at batay po doon bumoto kami. Sa inyong po mga presentasyon at doon sa mga isyong na ilagak dito sa komite, pwede hong nagkamali kayo. But does it require a rescission of the franchise? Pwede po bang yun ang maging batayan ng hindi pagre-renew? Pwede rin pong ito rin na maging batayan na sabihin ng mga miyembro ng komite na wag i-renew dahil ganito ang naging ginawang violation. Pero importante po sa amin na tanungin ang ating mga applicant, ang ABS-CBN Corporation, para malinawan po tayong lahat. Alam mo natin na ang kalagahan ng inyong trabaho, ng inyong negosyo. Hindi lang po negosyo yan. Siya po ang nagbibigay ng kultura, siya po ang nagbibigay ng impormasyon at kaisipan sa ating mga mamamayan at higit sa lahat sa ating mga kabataan. Gusto ko rin pong sabihin, and yeah, if I may make the presentation, Mr. Chairman, napaka-komplikado po ng usapin nitong PDRs. Hindi ho ganun kasimple. At sa akin pong maliit na presentasyon, at siguro sa ating mga tanungan, malinawan natin talaga. Pero pagpaumanin niyo ho, dahil ako po may konklusyon sa aking ginawang pag-aaral at sa aking presentasyon ngayong hapon. Next slide, please. Yung ating pong konstitusyon, which you mentioned, Attorney Del Castillo, dalawa pong bagay ang sinasabi niya, ownership and management. Yan pong dalawang bagay na kanyang tinitingnan sa isang korporasyon. Higit sa lahat sa mass media, 100% ang ownership wholly owned by Filipinos. Ibig sabihin nyo, kahit gatiting, hindi pwedeng magkaroon ng ownership ang dayuhan. Sa ating pong mga tahanan, no, meron ho ding control at ownership. Yung ownership, pag-aari yung mag-asawa, yung bahay. Pero yung control, kay misis. Dito ho, hindi naman pinag-uusapan mismo ang control. Because the cases you mentioned about Herbosa and Roy, the case you mentioned about Gamboa, we're all talking about the 60-40 relationship and they were talking about control. So pinag-aralan po nila they were studying the common and preferred shares and now it affected the voting, the beneficial ownership of the corporation. So ibang po naman ang usapin ng ownership. Yun lang po ang pinag-uusapan natin dito. Dahil sa palagay ko naman, sa control, wala naman po sigurong ganong lumabas o naging epekto. But let us see. Ang PDRs po ay pagtatago sa tunay na pagmamay-ari ng dayuhan. Next slide, please. Ano po ba ang depository receipt? Ang sabi po niya, katulad na banggit niyo, matagal na po ito. Meron pong American Depository Receipts, Depository, yan po yung sinasabi nila. Meron pong GDR, German Depository Receipts, Global Depository Receipts. Ang kaibahan dito sa Pilipinas, nung ginawa po ito, at matagal pong hindi ginawa sa Pilipinas po, dahil may ownership restriction. Hindi nila alam paano ipoporma ang depository receipts. At nangyari lang po ito, ng katulad ng binanggit nyo, na magsimula itong 1999 nang ito po isinagawa ng ABS-CBN at ng iba pang kumpanya na gumawa ng depository receipts. Ito po ay negotiable security which represents ownership, interest, and securities of a foreign issuer, typically trading outside its home market. A PDR represents a share in a company which gives the owner the right to all the dividends due and shares of stock acquired. Ang ibig pong sabihin, ang lahat ng kita ng PDR pupunta doon sa may hawak ng PDR. Ang PDR po, ito po yung kinyo pong Philippine Depository Certificate. Ang nakalagay po dito sa inyong Philippine Depository Certificate, one existing share of ABS Broadcasting Corporation is equal to 1 PDR. Andito po, nakasabit po sa amin sa inyong komite. Pwede yung bumalik yung slide? Parang nauna. So, hindi po pwedeng ibenta o bilhin ang PDR kung hindi gustong ibenta ng may-ari. Ang ibig sabihin po, para lang humaliwanagan yung ating mga nanonood, sa palengke ho, may rights. Sa palengke, yung nagbebenta, pwede niyang ibenta yung rights niya. Umabot po yan ng 100,000, minsan milyon pa. Yung kita sa rights niya, pumupunta doon po sa nagbebenta sa palengke. Pero yun nga po, walang titulo. Dito po sa PDR, nakasabay po ito sa isang titulo. Wala siya sa pangalan ng titulo, pero siya ang nagmay-ari ng titulo. 1 ABS-CBN Broadcasting share is equal to 1 PDR. Sa palengke, rights, walang titulo, pero yan po, ganyan ang nagiging usapin sa kita at pagmamay-ari. Next slide, please. Yung puminanggit niya, tama po kayo. Ang ABS-CBN Corporation ay kaiba sa ABS-CBN Broadcasting Corporation. At ang kumpanya po ng ABS-CBN Holdings Corporation ay ang pagbibenta ng PDR. So pag tinignan po ang ABS-CBN na kumpanya, ang may-ari ABS-CBN Holdings Corporation. Next slide. Ang ABS-CBN Holdings Corporation po, 50% pagmamay-ari ng Lopez Inc. At iba pang mga direktor at opisyalis nito. Yan po ay galing sa inyong webpage. Next slide, please. Yan din ho, galing sa Philippine Stock Exchange, na ang sinasabi po niya na ang ABS-CBN Broadcasting ay owned by Lopez Inc. At ito po ay kasama dito ang negosyo ng pagbibenta ng PDR. Next slide. Ang ABS-CBN po, maraming layers ng pagmamay-ari. Hindi lang po ang ABS-CBN Corporation, katulad po yung kaninang pinakita ko, ang nagmamay-ari ABS-CBN Holdings. Nandiyan po ang PDR sa ABS-CBN Holdings. Ang Lopez Inc. din po, na hindi ho yan listed, meron po yan Lopez Holdings na listed company. So ang layering po, napakadami. Diyan po sa diagram na yan, makikita nyo. And for the record, Mr. Chairman, pag paumanin po ng ABS-CBN Corporation, hindi ho sinambit sa amin ang dokumento ng Lopez Inc. to Lopez Holdings Corporation. And maybe at a proper time, we can ask for that. Kasi ang hawak lang po namin, ABS-CBN and ABS-CBN Holdings. Next slide, please. Kung titingnan nyo po, dyan po sa listahan ng Lopez Holdings Corporation, 54% po dyan ay Lopez Inc. Yung pong Filipino group ng PCD nominee, dyan po ang mga PDRs, 30%. At malinaw po, nakadeklara sa inyong mismong website, non-Filipino PCD nominee corporation at 9.89%. Kanina sinabi na Atty. Del Castillo, meron na pong ABS-CBN Holdings, meron na pong banyaga na magmamay-ari. And I think it's very clear also, nandito po sa akin yung pag-uusap na ginawa noong shareholders meeting. Ang sabi po, the PDRs sa ABS-CBN Holdings, the PDRs unlock the share value of ABS-CBN, allowing foreigners to participate in a media enterprise whose ownership is constitutionally limited to Filipinos, with foreigners allowed to buy PDRs, shares which have long been undervalued, can now play catch-up with the regional media counterparts. Ito naman po galing sa ABS-CBN Holdings Corporation. So paglilinaw lang po, may Lopez Inc., may ABS-CBN, meron ABS-CBN Holdings, at meron Lopez Holdings. Sa dalawa pong korporasyon ng ABS-CBN Holdings at Lopez Holdings, meron pong mga banyaga na nagmamay-ari ng PDRs. At ang PDRs po niyan, may katumbas na share sa ABS-CBN. So ito po yung susunod, ang ABS-CBN, next slide please, Corporation. Kung titingnan nyo po dyan, 490 million shares, Lopez Inc. Tapos nandyan din po yung PCD Nominee Corporation, 352 million shares. Yan po kailangan nating himayin. Sino po ba dyan ang PDR holders na banyaga? Next slide please. Again, in the Lopez Holdings Corporation, nakalagay po dyan, Lopez Holdings Corporation entered into a memorandum of agreement with Lopez Inc. for the subscription of Philippine depository receipts to be issued by Lopez Inc., which are common shares of ABS-CBN Corporation. Lopez Holdings Corporation's total investment in the deposit receipts amount to 1.5 billion. Kaya pag puman niyo po, Atty. Del Castillo, medyo i-debunk ko lang po yung binanggit niyo kanina, there is an actual share in ABS-CBN Corporation. They may not have their names. Wala po sa pangalan nila yung ABS-CBN Corporation share, pero ang bawat PDR ay may katumbas na share sa ABS-CBN Corporation. Next slide please. Yan po ang sample contract. Pinakita ko na po kanina yan at muli po papakita ko yan. Ang existing corporation po ng ABS-CBN Broadcasting, 1 PDR, 1 ABS. Kung iahambing ko po yan sa bahay, meron kang bahay, may titulo. Yung titulo mo, sinabi mo, may papel kang hawak. Ako nagmamay-ari ng 30% ng bahay na yan, wala kang pangalan sa titulo. Pero batay sa kontratang yon, hindi mabibenta yung bahay. O kung mabenta man, mapupunta sa iyo ang 30%. Pag ang bahay pinarenta ng 1,000, 300 pupunta sa iyo, bawat kita ng bahay na yan. Yan po, sa aking palagay, is a circumvention of our Constitution on ownership. Sa maraming pagkakataon, yan po ay pwede mo nating sabihin anti-dummy. Na merong banyaga, meron siyang kinabitan na korporasyon na Pilipino, pero ang kita, ang pagmamay-ari sa katotohanan kanya. So ito po yung slide ng ABS-CBN, 1 share, 1 stock. Ito po, katulad na banggit ko, ay violation ng ownership. Isang pagpapaliwanag pa rin ang tax declaration, hindi siya titulo, pero yun po ay pagpapakilala ng pagmamay-ari. Kung ito po lang ay paliwanag natin sa ating mga kababayan, ganun po ang kanilang sitwasyon. Ngayon maraming pinag-usapan sa control. Kasi ang sabi po nila, wala namang control dahil sa wala naman silang boto, wala silang magagawa. At kung sakasakali, ang holdings corporation ang bumoboto. Papasok po ako doon sa kontrata natin, yung Philippine Deposit Receipt Instrument. Next slide please. Thank you. Ang nakalagay po dito, it will not alter, modify, or otherwise change its articles of incorporation or bylaws or take any action as to materially prejudice any rights in relations to the PDRs. Ito po ang tinatawag na negative covenant. Wala kang pwedeng gawin hanggat kapit ko ang PDR. Wala pong pinagkaiba yan nung ECQ. Doon po sa kaso ng Rappler, bago ka lumabas, magpaalam ka sa barangay, kumonsulta ka. Dito, sinasabi na ng barangay, hindi ka pwedeng lumabas. Sa parehong ehemplo, ang kontrol nasa barangay. Sa pagkakataong na hunto, ang may-ari ng PDR may kontrol sa korporasyon. Next slide. Ito po, sinabi kanina ni Chairman Alvarado, when the law is clear, there is nothing for the courts to do but to apply it. This is the case of the Tawang Multipurpose Cooperative versus La Trinidad Water District. Our Constitution is very clear. There should be no foreign ownership, foreign control of our mass media corporations. Bawal po ang banyaga na magmay-ari o mag-control. At yan po malinaw na malinaw at hindi po natin pwedeng palusutan. Last slide po. What cannot be done directly cannot be done indirectly. If acts that cannot be legally done directly can be done indirectly, then all laws would be illusory. Pagpainman niyo ho, kahit isang patak, kahit gabuti lang ng pagmamayari, hindi pwede. Kahit na ano pong layering ng korporasyon, pag may lumabas na isang banyaga at pumasok yan sa ABS-CBN Corporation, hindi ho pinapayagan. Hindi ho pinapayagan ang direktang pagmamayari. At pagpamanin niyo, Atty. Del Castillo, ang PDR po ay isang pagpapalusot ng pagmamayari ng banyaga. Maraming salamat, Mr. Chairman. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the clarification, Congressman Vice Chairman Mike Defensor. At para po sa kaalaman ng lahat, dahil po ang pinag-uusapan ay PDR, kahit po ABS-CBN lang po ang nag-a-apply ngayon, ay nais po ng committee ito na makita lahat ng mga PDRs ng mga mass media and broadcasting companies na nabigyan na, formerly nabigyan na, or mag-a-apply pa lang dito sa joint committee na ito, lalong-lalo na po yung mga major broadcasting stations natin. Sana po bago yung susunod na hearing ay makuha natin at mapag-compare natin kung pare-parehas ba ang laman ng kanilang mga PDRs. The committee's secretary is hereby directed to secure copies of all PDRs of all major broadcasting mass media companies in the country that will apply or otherwise applied and given franchise by this committee.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Deputy Speaker Dan Fernandez, alam niyo po nung huling hearing po natin ay hindi po natapos ni Deputy Speaker Dan Fernandez yung kanyang oras. At kung ako'y nagkakamali, nag-uumpisa pa lamang siya sa kanyang pagtatanong, kaya po napakaswerte po niya sa pagkakataong ito, hindi ibabawas pa ba namin yung 1 minuto mong nakonsumo? Hinihingi na po niya na pambonus yung 1 minute na nakonsumo niya. So you now have your fresh 5 minutes, Deputy Speaker Dan Fernandez, para sa pag-uumpisa ng ating nag-iisang round ng interpellation. Maraming salamat po.
Maraming salamat, Mr. Chairman. At nadinig po natin ang manifestation ng ABS-CBN at nadinig din po natin ang manifestation ni Vice Chairman Mike Defensor. Ang pinagtatalunan po natin dito ay ang paggamit po ng PDR, whether ang PDR po na issue natin sa mga banyaga ay in consonant with the Section 11, Article 16 of the 1987 Constitution that states that the ownership and management of mass media shall be limited to the citizens of the Philippines. And at the same time, ito rin po ay binabanggit sa Section 8 ng Foreign Investment Act of 1991, and the same time, itong pong sinasabi nating Presidential Decree number 1018 of Section 2. Siguro po ang una kong katanungan na gusto ko pong malaman ay sa ABS-CBN Corporation, kung magkano na po yung ating capital investment, yung buong total investment ng ABS-CBN, magkano na po? ABS-CBN Corporation can answer this. Meron na po ba siyang nasa 100 billion, 85 billion, 90 billion? Magkano po ba?
Sir, Mr. Chair, yung total investment po ng ABS is about 30 billion more or less in stockholders' equity po.
Yun po yung sa stocks. Pero yung totality po ng investment. Kasi I think yung sinasabi po natin, ito po ba yung equity ng ABS-CBN, yung 35 billion. But yung totality po niyan ay umaabot na po siya ng 84.5 billion as submitted. 84 billion. Correct. Okay. So sa 84.5 billion na pag-aari ng ABS-CBN Corporation, magkano po yung naibigay po natin or ano po ba ang naging mode o procurement ng ABS-CBN Holding Corporation? So andito ang ABS Holding Corporation, andito ang ABS Corporation. Ito po bang hawak ng ABS Holding Corporation na nanggaling sa ABS Corporation, magkano po ang nailipat sa ABS Holding Corporation? Anybody from ABS Holding Corporation can answer this. Okay. Mr. Chairman, meron po akong hawak na ABS-CBN holdings in 2016 and 2017. At dito, nababanggit na meron silang ang holding corporation ay may investment sa ABS-CBN Corporation ng 15 billion 102 million 724 and 489,000. 15 billion. Is that right, Mr. Chairman?
ABS-CBN, please answer. Tama po ba yung binanggit na numero ni Deputy Speaker Dan Fernandez?
Sorry, Mr. Chair. Kung pwede sana balikan na lang namin kayo. We don't have the number right now.
Okay. Sige po. Pwede po yan. At sa sinabit po ninyo kasi, lumalabas na may 15 billion na kayo in-invest sa ABS-CBN Corporation, yung pong ABS-CBN Holding Corporation. At ang equivalent po nito ay maabot sa 325 million and 51,900 number of shares. Okay? At ang equivalent po nito sa na-issue na ng holding corporation na PDRs ay maabot ng 15 billion 70 million 219,000. So ang tanong ko po sa holding corporation, sino po ba ang umuupo ngayon bilang presidente at CEO ng holding corporation? Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chairman, si Mr. Oscar Lopez ho ang presidente
Lopez
and
po.
chairman.
Siya po ngayon ang CEO. At ang holding corporation is into buying and selling. Is that right, Mr. Chair? Buying and selling, di po ba? Meron po ba tayo na tinatawag natin na kapag holding company ka, syempre, you have a different kind of industries that into your holding company. Are you in the other investment as well, like telecommunication, sa food, or sa oil?
Hindi po. Ang ABS-CBN Holdings Corporation ay specific ko to...
Para lang doon sa pag-i-issue ng PDRs. Wala po tayong ibang other na industriya na hinahawakan, in other words,
Wala
Mr.
po.
Chair. Okay. So, ano po ang mga depository receipts na ginagamit natin? Katulad na nabanggit ni Vice Chairman Mike Defensor kanina, meron tayong ADR, GDR, CDR. Iba-iba po yan American Depository Receipt. Ano po yung ginagamit na depository receipt ng ABS-CBN Holding Corporation.
Yun po yung PDRs na dinescribe namin kanina.
Ano pong ginagamit po natin? Siyempre, meron tayong counterpart sa international, di ba? Okay, itong holding company, siyempre, nag-issue po kayo ng PDRs, di ba? Nag-issue. At ano po yung dinatawag nating depository bank na pinaglalagakan natin ng ating pong PDRs? Kasi siyempre, may nagbebenta po ng PDR sa foreign, di ba? Sino po ang depository bank na ginagamit po natin?
Iba-iba po yan, depende po sa investor. Pwede pong hawakan ng investor directly yung PDRs, yung ABS-CBN broadcasting shares naman, na underlying shares na tinatawag natin kasi siya yung nagsisecure ng PDRs, yan po ay naka-pledge at nandun sa isang trustee bank.
Correct. Pero dapat meron kayong naka-assign. Katulad sa pledge agreement ninyo, sinasabi nyo sa pledge agreement nyo that you have a security agent. Di ba? Maliwanag po. Dito, nakalagay po yan. Sa security, that the issuer in respects of the PDR are secured by the pledge in the favor of security agent. Na kumbaga, yung pong inyong tinatawag na mga share, diyan po yan nilalagak. Di ba? Para po sa mga PDR holders natin. So, ang tanong ko lamang po ay simple. Meron po ba tayong depository bank?
Si Attorney Quezon po ang sasagot. Siya po ang corporate secretary.
Mr. Chairman, yun hong pledge agreement po namin is with Philippine Central Depository.
Ayun. So, ang ibig po sabihin, ang ating pong issued by ABS-CBN Holding Corporation, yung PDRs po, nilalagak po natin sa Philippine Central Depository. Kasi sila po yung nag-handle nung in-issue nating PDR.
Yung shares ho, na underlying shares ho ng PDRs, yun yung nakalagak sa
yes, yung
PCD.
naka-attach na share natin na katumbas ng isang PDR, sila ang may control. Yung PCD. Am I right, Mr. Chairman?
As a pledge occasion.
Salamat po. At according sa report nga natin, meron nga tayong sinasabi dito na I wanted to be confirmed kung talagang 15 billion po yung ating pong ininvest sa ABS-CBN Corporation. At ito nga, nabigay natin yung corresponding na PDR na nasa PCD. Di ba? Am I right, Mr. Chairman? Yes or no?
Pakiulit ho yung question.
Okay. Yung PCD, yung ating pong holding corporation, nag-issue siya ng PDR at yung in-issue niyang PDR, hinawakan ng Philippine Central Depository at ito po ay nasa control ngayon ng PCD at hindi siya control ng tinatawag nating PDR holders, yung mga foreigners. Hindi nila hawak yung share kasi nga yung share na andun sa PCD. Dahil according sa inyong agreement, sa pledge agreement, ang maghahawak noon ay ang security agent na PCD.
Mr. Chairman, ang PDR in-issue ho namin to the investors. So nasa hawak ho ng mga investors yon. But yung underlying shares yun ang naka-pledge sa PCD.
Yung underlying share, siya ang naka-pledge sa PCD.
Opo.
Correct. Okay. So ngayon, dito kung makikita po ninyo yung sinabmit po natin sa Security and Exchange Commission as of August 31, 2018, nandito po yung mga PDR holders natin. Meron po tayong top 20 na masasabi po natin na PDR holders. At dito po nga ay nakasaad yung PCD Nominee Corporation na kung saan foreigner siya. Meron din PCD Nominee Corporation na kung saan Pilipino din siya.
Opo.
At ang number of shares ng PCD Nominee Corporation ay 198 million plus shares. At ang hawak niya po ay 61% doon sa share. Sa PCD Nominee Corporation naman na hawak ng Pilipino, meron siyang 114 million shares, plus shares. At umaabot to ng 35%. Marami pa dito na mga PCD holder. Ngayon, kasi ako I've been into trading as well before. Pero hindi naman po ako player. Para lang marami lang po akong mga kaibigan na mga nagte-trade. At ito po sa time na binanggit sa akin itong PCD Nominee Corporation na isang foreign corporation. Pero hindi po siya publicly listed as one of the stock corporation. Andito ang SEC, Mr. Chairman. May I be allowed to ask SEC kung ano yung this PCD nominee corporation really stands for? Kasi parang pag titingnan mo siya sa Google, hanapin mo yung PCD nominee corporation, hindi mo makita yung kanyang financial statement. Hindi mo alam kung sino ang mga board of directors. Hindi mo alam kung sino yung sa articles of incorporation nila. Hindi natin makita kung ano at sino itong PCD nominee corporation. Mr. Chairman, can we allow the Secretary, Commissioner ng SEC to answer this? Andyan po ba wala ho pala si Chairman, yung Vice Chairman?
SEC, meron pa
Mr. Chairman. Hello.
Yeah, Commissioner, Commissioner Amatong. Can you answer this kung, kasi medyo grayish ang area ng PCD Corporation at maraming mga public investors like yung mga friends ko ang nagsasabi that this PCD is a lodging in ng mga majority stockholders sa mga kumpanya kung saan doon nila nilalagay ang kanilang mga share na dapat supposedly ay naka-offer sa public. What can you say about this, Mr. Chairman?
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, to explain, PCD Nominee Corporation is the legal entity that's used to facilitate trading in the Philippine Stock Exchange. It is ang tinatawag po dyan sa ay Central Securities Depository. So ang ating mga stocks po ngayon hindi na nakapapel. We don't have stock certificates anymore. All of our stock holdings are now listed in the electronic database of a corporation called PDTC, Philippine Depository Trust Corporation. And the PCD Nominee Corporation is the legal entity that has title to all of these securities. So that pag nagbenta po tayo sa stock exchange, kukunin na lang galing sa PCD nominee yung shares of stock that is in our name under our brokerage's name, and then ililipat dun sa bumili. At the same time, yung bayad na katumbas dun sa pagbenta na yun ay pupunta sa atin through our broker. So PCD Nominee Corporation, Your Honor, Mr. Chairman, is a Philippine legal entity that is used to facilitate trading on the Philippine Stock Exchange. PCD Nominee Corporation, Mr. Chairman, also is used to distinguish kung sino yung foreign investors sa domestic investors. Kaya makikita po natin yung PCD nominee foreign, those are the shares of stock held in the name of PCD Nominee Corporation for foreign investors. Tapos yung PCD nominee domestic or Filipino are those shares of stock owned by Filipinos but held in the name of PCD Nominee Corporation in order to facilitate stock trading.
So Mr. Chairman, ang sinasabi mo, yung PCD, pag nag-trade ka at ginamit mo yung Philippine Central Depository, you don't need a certificate of stock. In other words, paperless ang PCD. Kumbaga parang wala ka nang i-issue na certificate of stock dahil nga po yun ang ganoon ang sistema na ginagamit ng PCD. At ito ang ginagamit at itong mga PDR under dito po sa ABS-CBN, isa yung PCD nominee. In other words, Mr. Chairman, medyo ang problema po natin dito, hindi natin sila kilala. Hindi natin alam kung sino itong mga incorporators. Dahil nga po, hindi sila publicly listed, Commissioner. Ang tanong ko sa iyo, Mr. Chairman, bakit hindi sila publicly listed? And considering that ABS-CBN and other companies like SM, Digital Telecom, marami ang gumagamit ng PCD Corporation. Kung publicly listed sila, dapat, di ba, makikita mo. Pero at this point, of time, ang PCD po ay hindi siya public listed. At any rate, Mr. Chairman, this is an issue that we need to tackle in a separate investigation. Kaya ako lamang po nabanggit kasi I think it is incumbent upon the ABS-CBN holding company that you have to somehow find it out kung sino po yung ating mga PDR holders. Precisely because under the Section 11 of Article 16 of the 1987 Constitution dictates that dapat truly and completely owned tayo by Filipino citizens. At ngayon, kung makikita po natin na shady ang mga karakter ng ating mga PDR holders, I think it is the responsibility of the holding company. But be that as it may, Mr. Chairman, I want to go on with my next question.
Before the Deputy Speaker Fernando continues, just for the information of the committee members, the time of Deputy Speaker Puno and Congressman Bambol Tolentino were given to the Deputy Speaker Fernandez. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Okay, ang ano po ba ang ABS-CBN Holding Corporation, aside po dito sa nakita natin PCD Nominee Corporation, meron pa ba kayong ibang foreign investors na bumili ng PDR? Aside from PCD Nominee, meron po ba bang ibang foreign investors na nag-issue ng PDR?
Honorable Fernandez, yung PCD nominee po yung depository, Philippine Depository, Central Depository, para po yung taguan ng pera. Diyan po nilagak yung PDRs. So ang tanong po ni Congressman Fernandez, doon po sa mga bumili ng PDRs, ilan po ang nakapasok ngayon sa Philippine Central Depository?
Mr. Chairman, kasi po,
go ahead.
Ang securities na traded ngayon sa Philippine Stock Exchange, scriptless na po yan. So wala na pong papel. Kaya po yung Philippine Central Depository, nandun po yung main security.
Correct.
So nagtitrade po yan without any script. So at any one time, pwede kung maglipat-lipat yan because they are traded.
So itong...
Pero...
Okay, sige po.
Sorry
Sige, Mr.
Ang
Chairman.
gusto po ata ni DS Dan mula sa ABS-CBN Holdings at saka sa Lopez Holdings, i-forward ninyo yung PDRs po na pag may-ari ng foreign, at least bought in the foreign market, owned by foreign nationals.
Like for example po, Mr. Chairman, kung hindi po masagot ng holding company, doon po sa beneficial ownership disclosure na nilabas po ng ABS-CBN Holdings, ang Prudential Singapore Holdings Limited, a Singaporean corporation, have a substantial holder ng 15 million shares sa ABS-CBN Holdings. Is that right? Siguro alam niyo po yun. At dito po sa news article na nakita po natin sa Philippine Star, ang ABS-CBN raises 2.5 from sale of PDRs. At ito po ay in-issue sa Mercury Media Holdings Company, an affiliate of the Capital Group of Companies. Can you kindly confirm this, if this 2.5 billion na kung saan lumaban sa Philippine Star, ano pa po ito June 6, 2013, ay na-issuehan ng PDR?
Mr. Chairman, yun hong mga foreign PDR holders ay nakalista sa aming top 100 PDR holders under PCD nominee non-Filipino. Andun ho sila.
So in other words, kasama po itong...
kasama ho dun sila.
Okay, marami pong salamat. At siyempre po, ay kanina nga, Attorney Del Castillo was trying to explain that hindi dividends ang tawag nyo pag kumita ang PDRs, di ba? Hindi siya dividend or interest. Ang tawag nyo po doon ay after computing all the operating expenses, yung mga loans, saka pa lamang bibigyan ng kita yung mga PDRs. Can you kindly submit to us, Mr. Chairman, the complete, kung hindi po dividends ang tawag po natin, ay ano po ang tawag natin dito? Parang...
Cash distribution po.
Cash distribution. Okay, dito sa PDR, sinasabi natin, hindi dividends, hindi interest, kundi cash distribution sa kinita ng mga PDR holders. Can you kindly submit to us the complete how much the foreigners, the holders of PDRs, magkano na po yung cash distribution sa kanila in comparison with the dividends that have been given to the ABS-CBN shareholders? Submit nyo lang po muna sa amin po yun.
Ano pong period, Mr. Chairman? Kasi po, nagbabago-bago po yan
For the last 3 years lamang po. Pero para na meron lang po kaming comparison, makita po natin, mas malaki ba ang kinikita ng foreigners dito sa PDRs nila? Or mas malaki kinikita ng mga Pinoy doon sa share? Kasi sinasabi natin, share, hindi naman natin binenta yun. Kumbaga, parang rights lang, di po ba? Gusto lang po natin makita yung comparison.
Mr. Chairman, pantay-pantay po ang cash distribution kasi one PDR,
sa share,
ang underlying security niyan, one share.
Madam, there is a difference between you get your share on an ordinary stock exchange and using the private placement. Pag private placement, meron po yung tinatawag na underlying na mga advantages. Like for example, pag gumamit ka ng traditional private placement, na kung saan sinasabi na pag kumita, na-reach mo na yung margin ng profit mo, ay pwede ka mag-increase ng income. And at the same time, doon sa structure na sinasabi na private placement, usually ginagamit to sa mga bulk na bilihan katulad nito na kapag tumaas yung stocks, pag nag-increase ang stocks mo, meron kang special arrangement sa depository bank. At pag bumaba yung stock, meron kang protection. Yan yung pinaka types of different private placement. At kapag ito pong 2.5 billion na binabanggit po natin dito, ay makita po natin kung anong placement ang ginamit nila. Have they gone into a ordinary buying of stocks or they have gone through a private placement? Kasi nga, Mr. Chairman, kailangan po natin makita kung paano nila pinurchase yung PDRs. Kasi kung meron mga advantages na ganito, mag-a-add yun doon sa kanilang tinatawag po ninyong cash distribution. Yun lang po ang gusto kong malaman, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, gusto ko pong sagutin muna yung tanong nyo about the dividends.
Sige po.
Yung 2017 nag-declare ang ABS-CBN ng dividends 1.04, 1 peso and 4 centavos. Natanggap po ito ng ABS Holdings, and then after deducting all the expenses, ang dineclare niyang cash distribution is 1.0281. So mas mababa ho yung binibigay.
So in other words, mas mataas pa rin ang kinita ng ating mga Pinoy na may hawak ng share komparado sa may mga hawak ng PDRs na foreigners. Okay, maraming salamat po, Mr. Chairman. Okay. Mr. Chairman, ngayon makikita po natin no, na from ABS-CBN Corporation, nadala po sa ABS-CBN Holding Corporation yung share, at pagkatapos po kumuha sila ng PCD, which is the Philippine Central Depository. Sa ganitong setup po ay ang question ay kung na-violate po natin yung Section 11, Article 16 of the 1987 Constitution. Ako po hindi naman po ako abogado, pero ako po ay nag-aral ng 1 year ng law sa UST. And at the same time, meron tayong mga tinatawag na legal parlance, no? Na sinasabi, quanto aliquid prohibitur ex directo, prohibitur ex obliquum. At sinasabi nila, what cannot be legally done directly cannot be done indirectly. Now, ibig po sabihin, kung sa Tagalog, kung ako po ay pupunta kay Congressman Zarate, sinasabi, bawal pumunta kay Congressman Zarate directly. Bawal pumunta. Ngayon, bawal din ako pumunta kay Congressman Zarate through Congressman Boying Remulla, indirectly. So, alam ko na, siyempre, ang ABS-CBN, dahil nga po itong PDR, ay allowed ng Security and Exchange Commission during the start of 1999, di ba? At ngayon po, sinasabi ng batas na hindi pwedeng direct or indirect, di ba? Na magbenepisyo ang ating pong mga foreigners. So, ang tanong ko, Mr. Chairman, itong mga PDR holders ay since hindi sila pwede mag-own ng share, so, ano ang pwede nilang maging benepisyo lamang? Yung pong tinatawag na cash distribution. Yun lang po ba ang kanilang nagiging benepisyo sa pagbili ng PDRs, Mr. Chairman? Attorney Castillo. Ang kanila pong, ang ibig ko po sabihin ay ito po bang benepisyo sa pagkita lamang ang nagiging karapatan ng PDR holders ng mga foreigners. In other words, wala na silang other na rights. Hindi na sila pwedeng bumoto, hindi sila pwedeng makaalam sa mga polisiya, hindi sila pwedeng sa lahat ng management. So, wala silang karapatang yun. Ang karapatan lang nila, cash distribution lang kayo.
Cash distribution po, and kasi traded po yan sa merkado, kung tumaas ang value ng PDR, pwede po silang mag-dispose sa stock exchange. So,
dalawa ang karapatan nila, Mr. Chairman. Ang karapatan nila, isa, para doon sa cash distribution na nakukuha nila, parang dividends o parang kita, at yung pangalawa is to hold and dispose of the
PDR po.
PDRs. Ngayon, ang tanong po, dito kasi sa section 3.1.2 na sinasabi sa Security and Exchange Commission, sa tinatawag po nating implementing rules and regulation ng Security Regulation Code, Republic Act 8799, ang beneficial owner daw ay sinasabi nila na any person who directly or indirectly through any contract, arrangement, or understanding has voting share or and has investment returns power. So ikaw, kung beneficial owner ka, may karapatan ka, isa, sa pagboto, and or sa investment return power. Yun yung definition ng beneficial owner na sinasabi po ng ating pong Security and Exchange Commission. Pero kung mapapansin niyo po kanina ay nakita ko rin yung ini-explain kanina ni Vice Chairman Mike Defensor doon po sa receipt na PDR po ninyo na binibigay sa mga PDR holders na foreigners. Kasi dito po makikita nyo, kung mapapansin po ninyo, ito ay sinasabi rito. For example, ang bumili po ng PDR share natin is Amerikano. For example lang, kunyari si Donald Trump, Wala akong isip eh. This certifies that Donald Trump is the register holder of the Philippine Depository Receipts contained herein and is entitled to the delivery or sale of one existing share of stock of ABS-CBN Broadcasting Corporation for every one PDR held. Ang akin lamang pong pagkaka-explika dito, pagkakaintindi, ito'y sinesertify ikaw, Donald Trump, na may hawak ka nito, entitled ka sa delivery and sale sa pagbebenta ng isang existing share of stock of ABS-CBN Corporation for every one PDR held. Kapag merong share, meron ka ba PDR, entitled ka rito sa share. So ito po yung nakalagay dito. Medyo nakaka-confuse po. Kaya siguro po, at the end of the day, we need to clarify kung yung ano yung ibig sabihin ng sale na nilalagay po natin dito po sa PDRC na dinidistribute po natin sa mga foreigners. But
Kung mamarapatin niyo po,
sige po, ma'am.
yung pong right na yan to transfer or to say, sell the share underlying the PDR, ito po yung exit mo mechanism. Kasi yung PDR po, meron kang binayarang deposit, pwede mo po i-exercise yung right na bilhin yung share. So kung gusto mong bilhin po yung share underlying the PDR, kung ikaw po ay Pilipino, kasi hindi naman po limited ang PDR sa banyaga. Kung ikaw ay Pilipino, ibibenta po sa inyo yung share. Meron po kayong babayaran, you have to go through a process. Kasi ang ibig sabihin nun, ayaw mo na ng PDRs, gusto mo na ng shares. So since you have that option to buy the shares, mag-serve ka lang po ng what they call exercise notice. Meron po kayong babayaran and then it goes through the process of transferring and trading the shares.
Yeah, I understand that, ma'am.
Deputy Speaker Fernandez, before we continue, Congressman Chico Alvarez, our chairman, our presiding officer, I think, cannot get through. Chairman Alvarez?
Narinig po ako?
Ayan po.
Congressman Dan, reminder na po, 15 minutes na po. Last na po, question natin. 15 minutes na po, Congressman Fernandez.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I will wrap up my line of questioning. Patapos na rin po ako, Mr. Chairman. So, going back to 1999, no? Siguro po kung ating pong mamarapatin, siyempre medyo, siguro going back to 1999, no? Naisip nyo ba na siguro sana hindi ko na lang ginamit yung PDR, no? Para hindi na nagkaroon ng konting conflict sa tinatadhana ng batas. Sana na lang, binenta ko na lang sa ating mga mayayaman na mga negosyante na willing na bumili. Naisip nyo ba ito, Madam Chair?
Kung papayagan nyo po na ituloy ko yung kanina, kung halimbawa nyo po ay banyaga, hindi qualified mag-own ng share, yun yung po sinasabi na the right to receive the proceeds of the sale. Ibibenta po yung shares para ang bibigay sa foreigner. Pera na po yan, yung proceeds. Pero wala ho siyang partisipasyon sa pagbibenta. May proseso po sa pagbibentang yun. So wala siyang karapatan magdikta kung sino ang buyer, magkano yung presyo, anong terms ng sale.
Yeah, ang sinasabi ko po, Mr. Chairman, sinasabi ko lamang po dito sa inyong PDR receipts, dapat po hindi po siya sale of one existing share of stock of ABS. Kasi confusing po yung nakalagay ditong binenta. Kapag meron kang isang PDR, may corresponding na isang share na binenta. Dapat hindi po ganun ang pagkakalagay po natin sa PDR receipts natin. Kasi kung ako foreigner, babasahin ko to, I am entitled to sale of one existing share. So, syempre, completely. Anyway, tapos na po tayo doon at naintindihan ko po yung point of view nyo po. Ang tanong ko lamang po ay, naniniwala po ba tayo that the media companies in the Philippines must observe the rule of the all Filipino rule in relation to Article 16 of Section 11 na kung saan kailangan wholly owned by the Filipino citizens. Do you believe on that, Mr. Chairman? Yes or no lang naman po yan?
Yes po, naniniwala po kami dyan kasi...
So, dapat po, kung naniniwala po tayo, ay na ito po ay tunay na pag-aari po ng mga Filipino citizens. Naniniwala po tayo na kapag ito'y pag-aari ng mga Pilipino, dapat ito'y walang bahid ng anumang pag-aalinlangan. Di po ba? At dapat po, kung ito po ay pag-aari ng ABS-CBN, pag tinanong kayo, ABS-CBN, yan po ba ay truly and completely owned by Filipino citizens? Dapat po walang ifs, dapat walang buts, di ba? Oo, pag-aari namin to completely, absolutely, 100%. Pero, meron kaming inisyong PDRs na kung saan na-issue namin sa mga banyaga. So, Mr. Chairman, I think it is incumbent on the part of ABS-CBN and also for that purpose, lahat na ng mass media that they have to be sensitive and dapat maging careful sila sa issue ng PDR or refrain from issuing PDRs because there is a thin line governing the ownership truly owned by the Filipino citizens and those PDRs that we have issued sa foreigners. But yun na nga, granting na sinasabi nyo, wala namang po siyang ownership. Pero yung rights na magkaroon ka ng cash distribution at yung ma-hold mo yung PDRs dahil nga katumbas noon ay isang share, hindi mo siya mabebenta. Hindi siya mabibili ng mga kapwa mo Pilipino. Yung share na yon naka-hold doon.
Thank you so much, Honorable Hernandez, for that, our Deputy Speaker. Honorable Alvarez, our presiding officer, I think you're again coming in through Zoom.
Sorry.
Yes. Your next interpreter.
Salamat po. Ubus na po yung time natin. Next po, mag-interpolate is si Minority Leader Benny Abante na kung saan ang kasunod niya si Congressman Bordado, ibinigay din yung oras sa kanya. May 10 minutes po si Minority Leader Benny Abante.
Mr. Chairman, maraming po salamat at pasensya na po. I request na sana po ay sa susunod na second round, kung meron pa, ay mapasama po tayo. Maraming salamat po and thank you so much.
Noted pa, Congressman Fernandez. Congressman Minority Leader Benny Abante, you are recognized.
Salamat po, Mr. Chair. Tama po yung sinabi ni Vice Chair Mike Defensor at kinakampihan ko po siya na wala po ditong pro and anti. Ang nais nating makita rito ay yung totoo. Ano po? Totoo lamang. At hindi po ito labanan ng mga kongresista na pinag-aawayan kung ikaw ay pro ABS-CBN o anti-ABS-CBN. Kahit ako po, tulad ng sinabi ni Speaker Alan Peter Cayetano, comprehensive, fair, impartial, the truth to come out. Yun po yun sa akin before I make any decision. Now, ngayon ko lang po na pag-aaralan ang kaibahan ng shares sa PDR. Ngayon ko rin po na pag-aaralan ang kaibahan ng ABS Corporation and ABS Holdings at Lopez Incorporated. Ito po mga katanungan ko that nais ko po maging clear sa akin. Ano po? At totoo po ba, noong 2013, ang ABS-CBN po ay nagbenta ng 22% of its effective shares to the Philippine Depository Shares to foreigners, 18% of which is US-based. The Capital Group, one of the biggest investment companies in the world. Totoo po ba yan?
Si Attorney Quezon po ang sasagot. Siya po ang corporate.
Totoo po yun.
Yung Capital Group ho ay is a private investor that invested in PDRs, and they invested in PDRs, and ABS Holdings Corporation use the proceeds from the sale of the PDRs to invest in ABS-CBN Corporation?
Hindi po yun. Hindi po yun yung tanong ko eh. Ang tanong ko po is it true that in 2013, ABS-CBN sold about 22% of the effective shares, hindi po PDR, through Philippine depository shares to foreigners, 18% of which is the United States-based, the Capital Group, one of the biggest investment companies in the world.
Hindi po yata 18% ho yung 20, hindi yata 22% yung...
Or whether it be hindi 22 o 18, pero kayo po ba ang ABS-CBN nagbenta po ng ilang percent ng effective shares sa Capital Group?
Hindi ho ang ABS-CBN.
A foreign corporation.
Mr. Chairman, hindi ho po ang ABS-CBN ang nagbenta sa Capital Group. It's
Sino po?
ABS-CBN Holdings Corporation that sold PDRs.
So hindi po ito shares, kundi PDR po ito.
Opo.
Okay, therefore, kung PDR po ito, you did not in any way violated the 1987 Constitution, which says that ownership and management of mass media shall be limited to the citizens of the Philippines or to corporations, cooperatives, or associations wholly owned and managed by such citizens.
Yes, sir.
So malinis po ang inyong sagot doon na wala kayong violation.
Yes, sir.
Sapagkat PDR ang binenta nyo.
Yes, sir.
Hindi shares.
Not shares, yeah.
All right.
At ABS Holdings so ang nagbenta, hindi yung ABS-CBN Corporation.
Meron po ba kayong pwedeng kopyang ibigay sa amin that ang binenta nyo sa Capital Group ay PDR?
Maghahanap po kami ng yung stock certificate.
Importante po yan para makita po natin. There's no question that you did not actually sell shares, but you sold PDRs.
Hahanapin ho namin yung PDR certificate na
kung inyong may sasubmit po sa committee, mas maganda po yon so that meron kayong ebidensya to show that you did not, the ABS-CBN Corporation did not sell shares. But it is the ABS-CBN Holdings na nagbenta ng PDR. Pwede mo ba yun?
Opo, we'll submit that.
Okay. How about the Lopez Incorporated? Did Lopez Incorporated get paid when it transferred to ABS-CBN Holdings 132 million ABS-CBN shares before the closing of the PDR's offering? Totoo po ba yan?
Nabayaran po ang Lopez Inc. nung...
Ano po yan?
Nabayaran po ang Lopez Inc. Nung tinransfer niya ho yung shares to ABS Holdings Corporation.
So, ano pong ibig sabihin ng nabayaran nung kayo po ay nag-transfer sa ABS-CBN Holdings ng 132 million ABS-CBN shares?
Noong 1999 ho, yung Lopez Inc. siya may hawak ho ng most of the ABS-CBN Corporation shares. So yung ibang shares ho niya, nilipat ho niya sa ABS Holdings Corporation. Utang muna ho yun ng ABS Holdings Corporation. Then when ABS Holdings Corporation offered the PDRs to the public, yung proceeds ho noon, pinambayad ho ng ABS Holdings Corporation sa Lopez Inc. for those shares that were transferred.
Okay. Ito po bang 132 million PDRs with an issue value each of 46 pesos or in monetary terms, 6.72 billion. Yun po ba yun?
Hindi ko... Hindi ko lang alam yun. Hindi ko lang kung compute kung ano, but it's 46 times 132.
Or more or less, more or less.
46 times.
Siguro later na lang po, if you're able to compute it. Pero ito po yung pangatlong question na gusto kong itanong sana. Did ABS-CBN pay taxes when the 132 million ABS-CBN shares were transferred from Lopez Inc. to ABS-CBN Holdings, free from income taxation?
Ang Lopez Inc. ho ang nagbayad ng taxes, ho?
Ang Lopez Inc.
Ang nagbayad ho ng taxes.
Okay.
Since the shares are, the underlying shares, ABS-CBN Corporation shares are listed and traded in the stock exchange. Nagbayad ho siya ng stock transaction tax nung nilipat ho niya sa ABS Holdings Corporation. So ang bayad ho niya is stock transaction tax. Nun ho yata is 1/4 of 1%.
Okay. Can Lopez Incorporated or ABS-CBN Holdings, or both, silang dalawa, trigger on their sole discretion the sale of any of those 13 million ABS-CBN shares without any holder of a PDR exercising the option attached to a PDR?
Hindi po, kasi po naka-pledge po yung mga shares. So hindi po pwedeng ibenta.
Naka-ano po?
Naka-pledge po.
Naka-pledge.
Yung po ang security ng PDR holders.
Okay. Maganda po yung napakalinaw para po makita po natin lahat ng mga bagay na ito. Ano po? And we're not biased to anything else, but we'd like to be objective in everything that we're doing here. Di po ba? Okay. Now, nung pong PDRs ay naibenta, who was the government agency that authorized the investment instrument?
Registered po siya under the Securities Regulation Code at ang agency po ng gobyerno ay Securities and Exchange Commission.
Okay. So therefore, the authorized agency is the Securities and Exchange Commission.
Opo. Opo.
And sa SEC po, wala silang nakita anumang violation ng ABS-CBN ito.
Wala po.
Sapagkat inalaw kayo di ba?
Kasi inaprubahan po nila.
At any point, pagkatapos ng sale ng mga PDRs, did any government agency question the validity of these PDRs or withdrew their authorization?
Wala po, kasi the registration continues to be in effect. Pati po yung listing.
So, ibig sabihin po niyan, that wala silang nakitang anuman na violation na ginawa ninyo. And you did it in good faith.
Opo, wala po. And in good faith po, kami po ay sumusunod sa lahat ng kanilang patakaran. So,
because if it's not in good faith, hindi po pwedeng payagan ng Securities and Exchange Commission. Ano po?
Opo, opo.
So, ngayon lang po, it is only now that this is being questioned or subject of inquiry.
Totoo po yan.
Okay. Now, alam nyo, hindi lang po ito para sa ABS-CBN Alright. Ginamit lang po siguro kayo para lahat po ng mga corporation and mass media corporation should realize ang mga bagay na ito. Ano po? Oo. Now, if in the course of these congressional hearings, it is proven that these PDR's investment instruments violated the constitutional restrictions on foreign ownership of media or Congress, requires you to buy back the shares. Are you willing to do it?
Kung kami po ay orderin ng korte, susunod naman po kami. So,
kung orderin ng korte. Pero you would not initiate, you would not do it yourself. If this committee has proven Naniniwala ba kayo that the committee will not prove this at all?
Yeah. Mr. Chair, with regards to the PDR, our sentiment po is that we acted in good faith by going to the SEC to secure approval before offering it to the public. And at that time, the SEC agreed that the instrument was legal. Pero po, if the SEC or a court of law or even Congress wishes to disqualify the use of PDRs equally across the entire media industry, then ABS will be willing to modify, alter, or comply with the order if so directed.
Only by orders of the court.
The court, the SEC, or Congress.
Okay. Let me try to go to another form of questions here. Did ABS-CBN secure prior approval from the NTC before it launched and sold its TV Plus gadgets?
Mr. Chair, the TV Plus is in compliance with the directive of the NTC to migrate broadcasting po to digital.
Hindi ko po masyadong narinig, please.
Yes, sir. I'm sorry. The sale po of the TV Plus boxes is in accordance with the directive of the NTC.
TV Plus gadgets.
Opo. The sale of the TV Plus boxes is in compliance po with the NTC directive to migrate our broadcast to digital po.
So what do you mean compliant? You do not need any prior approval?
Yes, we secured prior approval for the test broadcast of our TV Plus boxes. But the migration of our broadcast po from analog to digital is in compliance with an NTC directive to move all broadcasting away from analog and into digital po.
Okay. Did ABS-CBN seek prior authorization from the NTC before ABS-CBN sold programs and movies through its KBO channels on each TV Plus gadgets?
There are approvals from the NTC po.
Ano po yun?
Yes, there are approvals po from the NTC.
Hindi po ba ito parang violation?
Mr. Chairman.
Violation.
Point of order, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, with the indulgence of our presiding officer, Chairman Alvarez, if I may be allowed to preside. Yes, go ahead. What is the point of order, Congressman Remulla?
Mr. Chairman, it was upon agreement of everybody concerned that we would finish the PDR issue. I think that the black box issue can be discussed at a different time.
Thank you for that, Honorable Remulla.
I submit, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Pero isang question na lang kung pwede.
Opo. Go ahead.
Okay. Gusto ko lang po tanungin kung you believe that to be proper, no? Or is it a violation of the franchise, which limits the channels to free TV only?
Mr. Chair, may I answer the question?
Yes, Mr. Katigbak, please go ahead.
Sir, the channels continue to be free po. We do not charge any monthly fees for the receipt of those channels po.
Okay. Maraming salamat po sa inyong mga sagot. Mr. Chair, as I've said in my latest manifestation before the plenary House debate on ABS-CBN Provisional Authority to Operate, which is House Bill 6732, and I said, and I quote, if ABS-CBN is eventually allowed by this august body to operate for another 25 years, my humble request as a father, a Filipino, and a preacher that their programs be more family-oriented. And because of this, Mr. Chair, that I would like to reserve the right to be able to ask questions on their programming.
Yes, the Honorable Minority Leader.
On the other,
yes.
After the PDR,
yes, the Honorable Minority Leader, there will be a time when we look into the programming of the ABS-CBN, and of course, you will be one of the first who will be asking questions on this.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Minority Floor Leader, and also on the question of the black box, there will be a time for that. And again, as Minority Floor Leader,
as you well know, you are always the first to be recognized. The Honorable Barsaga is recognized.
Just a point of reminder and clarification. In order that we could have a systematic and orderly discussion, we have agreed before that we have to discuss first the constitutional issues. And finally, once the discussion on constitutional issues have already been completed, that would be the time that we discuss the main issue, whether or not ABS-CBN has violated the franchise issued by Congress. And the interpellation of our dear colleague, Congressman Abante, that will be the proper time to ask about the TV Plus.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much.
The Honorable Barsaga is correct. As agreed by the committee, we will first look into the constitutional issues. We have already gone through the citizenship. The second, now we are on the rounds of discussing the PDRs. We will be discussing the 50-year limitation, as this was raised in the past, after which we will be looking into the tax issues, labor issues, political intervention, and so on and so forth. The Honorable Barsaga, your point of clarification and explanation is duly noted. Salamat po. The next to interpolate, the Honorable Chairman, I think she is still on, he's still on Zoom.
Thank you, Congressman Mike Defensor. Next to interpolate, Congressman Mikey Arroyo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, may I request that the President of ABS-CBN, my esteemed batchmate, answer my questions. It's just a matter of, these are policy questions and factual questions. But of course, when the questions touch on legality, of course, I'm sure you can ask your lawyers. Much have been discussed about the holdings and the corporate structure of ABS-CBN, so I will not touch on those things, so we won't be repetitious. I just want to retouch on the PDRs because I'm really confused about the financial benefits of the PDR holder, if that's okay with you. I know it has been asked several times, but I'm still not clarified about this issue. So, for example, Carlo, how did you convince the buyer, or how are the buyers, the investors convinced to purchase these PDRs? I'm sure you promised them a certain rate of return. I'm sure you said that it will be a good investment for you. Because apparently they cannot vote anyway. So what was the pitch you gave them?
Mr. Chair, I will answer to the best of my knowledge. I was not present during the original issuance.
It's just a factual question, just a policy question.
To an investor po, the value of the PDR is attached to the value of the underlying share. And so an investor in the PDR benefits if the value of the underlying share or if the performance of the company is successful, but he also takes a loss if the underlying share devalues or if the performance of the company is poor.
Okay, so, because I believe you... sorry, you were still talking. I'm sorry.
So a PDR holder makes an investment presumably with the goal of generating a capital gain on the sale of his PDR, which will happen if the performance of the underlying share is good.
Okay, because I believe you gave a share of, was it 45.90, or was it close to 46 pesos, right, per share?
Yes, po.
Okay. So I'm sure you said that, look, it's going to be a good investment, though you cannot vote, correct?
That's right.
I'm sure you were very transparent in your dealings with the public. So, of course, if I was the prospective PDR buyer, I would have questions I would want to ask. For example, I will ask you, so ABS-CBN, in totality, how much are the PDRs, how much worth will the PDRs be in totality? I don't know, for the record, how much are those worth, everything, the PDRs? At 123 million plus shares plus times 46, right? Something like that.
Sorry, I don't have the exact number.
Anyway, are you aware if there were bulk buyers?
Yes.
They were bulk buyers for sure, right?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
What was the biggest bulk buyer, to your knowledge? How much was the biggest bulk buyer?
We don't have.
Please take your time.
Mr. Chair, we would have to go back to the records in 1999. We don't have
Okay. So anyway, just for the sake of policy, for example, let's give a. Is it okay if we play with a certain number, just for the sake of making things clear, assuming Congressman Remulla, former Congressman Suplico, and Congressman Benny Abante, assuming we put up money together, assuming we and our friends that time, we will buy, assuming worth 5 billion pesos worth of PDRs. So we'll say, Mr. ABS-CBN, we have 5 billion worth of shares. We have 5 billion pesos worth. Can we buy PDRs worth 5 billion? I'm sure you would say, okay, sure, because that time you were trying to raise money because that this reason for the PDR system, correct?
Sorry, your question, Mr. Chair?
For example, during that time, you were trying to raise money, right? That's why the PDR system came about. I don't want to touch on its legality because it is a question of law which is brought to the Supreme Court right now, if I'm not mistaken. So, for example, assuming a group led by Congressman Benny Abante says, Carlo, we have here 5 billion pesos. We want to buy, we're a group, we'll buy 5 billion worth of PDRs. Of course, we would have said, oh, good, at least that's a headache. That's 5 billion worth less worth of a headache, correct? And then you would say, but you can't vote, okay? You're only allowed, your only benefit will be the financial consideration, the dividends or the
appreciation,
whatever, right? The rights, the financial benefits. So what I'm trying to say is that you mean to tell me a 5 billion bulk buyer will put money there without a shadow of any influence in your management?
Yes, Mr. Chair. So the gain that the PDR holder hopes to capture is not just on the cash payout. It's really more on the capital appreciation of the PDR.
Okay.
So hopefully, in your example, Mr. Chair, if you had subscribed to 5 million worth of PDRs and the company performed very well, then hypothetically again, that 5 million could be worth 6 million, in which case you would have taken a 20% capital gain.
So these bulk buyers, they jumped into the system without knowing that they will not have any iota of influence.
That's right, Mr. Chair.
That's a very good pitch, huh? So they bought into that without knowing that no matter how much money I will give you, I cannot influence the company whatsoever.
Mr. Chair, knowing full well that when they bought the PDR...
Okay, because I'm sure you told them that they cannot vote.
It's contained in the prospectus, Mr. Chair.
Okay. So,
yes.
For example, are you aware of do you play golf, classmate? Do you play golf?
Not very well, Mr. Chair.
Anyway, in golf courses or in clubs, there are what you call just playing rights. They don't really, technically, they don't own a share of the property. They don't vote, but they can play there. They can. Are you aware of that?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Is that similar to the PDRs or is it too far?
I would say a little different because playing rights allow you the use of the facility, but you have no financial gain in your playing rights.
But the point I'm trying to fathom is that if I were to give 5 billion worth of my hard-earned money and my friends' money, and I cannot influence even just a little bit, that would be very hard for me to do. But anyway, that's I guess you told them that from the very beginning that they cannot influence anyway. They cannot even vote because in the playing rights, they can't vote, but they can certainly influence the policymakers there. They can try, right? They can try to influence the policymaker because they're already inside the system. But as you say, this is very different from the PDRs, right?
Yeah, it's different, Your Honor, Mr. Chair.
Okay, because the issue here I'm trying to see if I put in so much money into the system, I would like to have some sort of influence in the management. That is my question anyway. Since you say that there's really no influence, then so be it. So thank you very much, Mr. Katigbak. Thank you very much, Ma'am Del Castillo. Thank you so much. You explained the way you explained it. At least our legislators were able to ask about ABS-CBN Holdings, Lopez Incorporation, and we saw how these corporations are tied together or not tied together. So anyway, thank you very much. If there's, I don't know, there are other legislators who want to ask more questions. So, Mr. Chair, thank you. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you, Congressman Arroyo. Next to interpolate, Deputy Majority Leader Boying Remulla.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Meron po tayong ABS-CBN Corporation at meron po tayong PDRs na may humahawak po ng PDRs. Sa pagitan po nila ay meron pong ABS-CBN Holdings Corporation. Tama ba po yan?
Tama po.
Kaya po hindi may-ari ng PDR, ang may-ari ng PDR ay walang relasyon sa ABS-CBN Corporation ay dahil pumapagitna po ang ABS-CBN Holdings Corporation.
Yeah, wala po silang direct link to
Walang
ABS-CBN.
direct link, pero indirectly meron po.
Wala din po, kasi contractual po ang PDR.
Sige ho, ito na lang. Ano po, meron ba hong cross-ownership ang ABS-CBN Corporation at ABS-CBN Holdings Corporation?
Shareholder po ng ABS-CBN Broadcasting ang ABS-CBN Holdings Corporation.
So, ang may-ari ng ABS-CBN ay, ang ABS-CBN Holdings po ay pag-aari talaga ng ABS-CBN Corporation.
Baligtad po, yung ABS-CBN Holdings po ang nagmamayari ng certain shares ng ABS-CBN Broadcasting.
Kaya ang ABS-CBN Holdings ay pwedeng magsabi sa ABS-CBN kung ano ang dapat gawin kung may problema ang kumpanya. Yun po ang sinasabi nyo.
Totoo po, kasi shareholder po siya at may shareholder rights po siya.
Ang tawag po dito sa batas, layering. Ito ba maling term o tamang term? Tama hutang termino ang layering o maling term ang layering? Layering.
Hindi po siya layering kasi po wala naman pong ownership ang PDR holders sa ABS-CBN Holdings. Sila lang po ay bumili ng
Namamagitan, may namamagitan. Sa gitna nila, meron pong nakabalandra na hindi pwede mag-usap diretso ang PDR at ang ABS-CBN Corporation. Tama ho yun?
Opo.
Ngayon, ang PDR, ang mga bawat PDR meron pong share. Ito'y tinanong kanina, lilinawin ko lang po. No? Sa bawat PDR, merong isang share of stock ang ABS-CBN Corporation. Tama ba ho yun?
Opo. Yun po ang security ng PDR holders.
Kanina, binanggit nyo sa amin ang notion, ang ideya ng full beneficial ownership na naroon sa ating Securities Regulation Code sa ating batas. Yung full beneficial ownership, ang sinasabi, hindi ka lang bumoboto, ikaw rin ang nagmamay-ari ng, sa iyo rin pupunta lahat ng kita, dividendo, at pwede mong ibenta yung iyong share of stock anytime. Tama ba ho yun?
Yung dividendo po, hindi...
Hindi dividendo. Ang tinatanong ko ho, yung pag-aari po ng isang tao ng share of stock, full beneficial ownership, ang ibig sabihin nun, pwede niyang ibenta at pwede siyang kumuha ng kita. Tama ba ho yun?
Opo.
Ngayon, ang may-ari po ng PDR, sa likod po ng bawat PDR, isang share of stock.
Yun po ang...
Nasa pangalan po ang share of stock ng Lopez Holding, ng
ABS-CBN Holdings.
ABS-CBN Holdings. Siya po ang owner of record ng share of stock.
Opo.
Ngayon, pwede ba kung ibenta ng ABS-CBN Holdings yung share of stock na nakalakip sa PDR?
Hindi po kasi po naka-pledge po siya.
Oho. Pwede lang po siya ibenta pag inutos ng may-ari ng PDR at siya ay Pilipino man o dayuhan, gusto nilang perahin, pwede ho nilang utusan ang holdings, ang issuer, na ibenta ang shares of stock. Tama ho yun?
Opo, one of his rights po is to cause the sale.
So pag ganun po, ang ibig sabihin, nawala na po ang poder ng ABS-CBN Holdings sa kanyang share of stock kasi nakasangla doon ang pwede na mag-utos yung PDR holder na ibenta ang share of stock.
Ganun na din po ang nangyayari.
Ayun lalabas, no? Ngayon, kapag ang kita may dividendo, ang retained earnings, dineclare po ang dividendo ng ABS-CBN Corporation. Saan po pupunta ang dividendo?
Sa ABS-CBN Holdings po.
Ito po yung sa PDR, pinag-uusapan natin, no? Ito, pinag-uusapan po natin to sa ideya na meron pong PDR.
Oo. Pero ang ABS-CBN Broadcasting po, ang binibigyan lang yan dividendo, yung kanya lang mga shareholders.
Bibigyan ng dividendo ang shareholder. Kaya on record, ang may-ari na share, ABS-CBN Holdings, nakuha niya ang dividendo.
Opo.
At may PDR sa likod. Ang sabi ng ABS-CBN Holdings, gusto ko gastusin yung pera. Kumita, nasa pangalan ko yan. Pwede ba niyang gawin yun?
Pwede po, kasi kanya po yung pera, pero he entered po into a contractual
Pero
agreement.
ihinantrata na ang perang yon ay pupunta sa PDR owner, menos lang ang kita at kaltas na lumalaban na nakikitain ng ABS-CBN Corporation. Holdings.
Opo, kasi po yun ang kanyang contractual commitment. Pero hindi po lahat dahil yung kanya pong expenses at yung kanyang mga gastusin at mga kailangan ay kailangan munang mauna.
Magkano po, ilang porsyento po ang lumalabas na expenses o kaya gastos pagka nagbenta ang isang may-ari ng PDR para makuha niya ang kita na dividendo na nagaling sa ABS-CBN Corporation?
Depende po yan kasi hindi naman ho pare-pareho. Meron pong mga commissions at meron pong ibang expenses.
Ang nakukuha po nila, nakukuha nilang pera, ay nanggaling po sa dividendo. Tama ho yun?
Ganon din po yun kasi nga po, it's a holding company. Yun po ang source ng income ng holding company.
Ang ideya po ng PDR sa ibang bansa, diretsong kumikita ng dividendo ang may hawak ng PDR. Tama ba ho yun?
Hindi ko po masasagot yun kasi jurisdiction po nila yun.
Nga, pero pagka binasa po natin ang mga pangyayari sa ibang bansa, tinignan natin ang definisyon ng PDR, kahit saan sa mundo, ang definisyon, ang kumikita na dividendo ay ang PDR. Sa ibang bansa po.
As I said po, laws and jurisdiction yan ng ibang country. Philippine lawyer lang po ako.
Let us take judicial notice of that, Mr. Chairman, kasi mahalaga na makita natin ang pagkagawa ng PDR na to. Kaya, ang kinikita ng isang PDR ay nanggaling sa dividendo, dumadaan muna sa ABS-CBN Holdings, kinakaltasan, pupunta ngayon sa may-ari ng PDR. Tama ho yun?
Opo.
Magkano ho yung kaltas? Ilang porsyento po ang kaltas? Porsyento ba ho ito? Paano ba ho kinocompute ang kaltas sa kita ng isang share of stock pinanggaling sa ABS-CBN Corporation, hinawakan ng ABS-CBN Holdings at bibigay yung kita sa pangatlo, sa PDR holder? Magkano po, ilang porsyento ang kinakaltas ng ABS-CBN Holdings?
Mr. Chairman, hindi ko ma-compute yung porsyento dahil depende ho yung sa expenses ng ABS Holdings.
Sige ho, magbigay kayo sa akin ng ano. Sabihin natin, may nagbenta ho kahapon ng ABS-CBN PDR.
For example ho,
sabihin nyo sa amin kung magkano nabenta at magkano nakaltas at magkano nakuha o makukuha na may hawak ng PDR.
kagaya ng sinabi ko nung March 23, 2017, ang declaration of dividends ng ABS Corporation is 1 peso and 4 centavos. Pagkakaltaso ng mga, pumunta sa ABS Holdings. Nagkaltaso ng expenses ang ABS Holdings at ang kanyang dinistribute sa PDR holders ay 1.0281. So 1.04 to 1.0281. Nag-iiba ho yan taon-taon. Nung March...
So 0.12 ang nawala?
Mga 1.12 centavos. 0.12 centavos.
Bale, 10% po ang nababawas kung susumahin po natin.
10%. Mga 10%. 10% po. Then March 22, 2018, ang dividends na nakuha ko dineclare ng ABS Corporation is 92 centavos. Ang nakuha ko ng PDR holders after deducting all the expenses is 0.8849. Then March 27, 2019, 92 centavos so in dividends ng ABS-CBN, Mr. Chairman, and then what was distributed by ABS Holdings is 0.8849. So mga 4 centavos.
Sabihin, yung nakukuha ng PDR nanggaling sa dividendo, kaya lang hinawakan muna ng ABS-CBN Holdings kasi bawal humawak ng shares of stock ang banyagang tao.
Mr. Chairman, hinawakan ho ng ABS Holdings dahil siya ho yung stockholder ng ABS-CBN Corporation.
Kasi hindi nga pwede ilipat, di ba? Hindi pwede ilipat kung ito po ay so hinawakan niya kasi siya po ang stockholder on record, pero hindi niya pwedeng ibenta dahil naka-pledge sa PDR. Bale, ang PDR po ay merong lien. May lien po siya, tama ho yun, sa share of stock ng ABS-CBN.
Naka-pledge po siya.
Naka-pledge po yan. Kaya ibig sabihin, meron silang interest sa share of stock ng ABS-CBN Corporation.
May security interest, may...
Security ba siya o pagbabawal lang na galawin niya o na hindi niya lang pwedeng hawakan na share dahil siya ay banyaga?
Ang PDRs po ay binenta, hindi lamang po sa mga banyaga. Pare-parehas po yan. So kahit sa Pilipino, ganun din po ang proseso.
Dumating ho tayo sa Pilipino. Ang Pilipino, pwede ho siyang may-ari na share, di ba?
Opo.
Pero ang presyo ho ng share of stock at ang presyo ng PDR, gaano kalayo silang dalawa?
That's market po.
Pakiulit ho yung question.
Ano ang pagkakaiba ng presyo ng PDR at ng presyo ng isang share of stock?
Nag-iiba ho yan araw-araw.
Pero sabihin natin, sa araw na ito, magkano ang PDR at magkano ang share of stock?
Reminder lang from the chair na 5 minutes na po, so i-wrap up na po natin, Kongboy. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to finish the questioning on this matter.
I don't have that information, Mr. Chairman, right now.
Move to suspend, Mr. Chairman.
Hearing suspended.
Forget the answer of price. It's market. Turn off your price.
Hearing resumed.
So ngayong araw po, 15 pesos at 66 sentimo ang isang ABS-CBN share at 15 pesos ang isang PDR. Ang pagkakaiba iba lang ho nila, kaltas.
Hindi, Mr. Chairman, hindi ho yata kaltas ang pagkakaiba dahil it's a market price. It means that market forces ho nagdedetermine ng price.
Pero hindi ho nagkakalayo ang presyo.
Hindi po nagkakalayo.
Sapagkat isa lang ang pinanggagaligan nila. Tama ho yun.
Dahil ho, yung isa ho is a derivative of the share. And the value of the derivative depends on the performance of the underlying
Ibig sabihin, financial derivative lang ang PDR na isang share of stock.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Kaya ang ibig sabihin, pag financial derivative ang PDR na isang share of stock, halos ikaw ang may-ari, kaya lang hindi ka nakarehistro.
Hindi po ganun ang konsepto nun kasi hindi po siya nagmamay-ari ng shares. It's a financial instrument po.
Malinaw na ho yun. Kasi nga, kaya nagsinimulan ko po ang aking tanong sa layering. Layering po. Kasi alam naman natin, tayo mga abogado rin po ako eh. Naintindihan ko po yung ginagawa ng mga abogado eh. Tinanong ho kayo ng inyong kliyente, paano ba kami makakapagbenta nito sa open market? At ang sabi naman natin sa kliyente natin, ito ang paraan. Kaya lang, siyempre may risk yan. Yan lang po, Mr. Chairman. Salamat po.
Thank you, Congressman Limurlia.
Thank you, Kongboy. Ang next mag-interpellate ay si Congressman Edsel Lagman. At para sa informasyon ng ating mga members, binigay po ni Congressman Quiboloy at Congressman Paduano ang kanilang oras para kay Congressman Lagman. Congressman Lagman, you have a total of 15 minutes. You may have the floor now.
Okay.
Hello.
Pwede na po.
Thank you, Joint Chairman, and thank you to Congressman Quiboloy and Congressman Paduano for giving to me the respective times. These questions may be answered by any of the resource persons of ABS-CBN Corporation and ABS-CBN Holdings Corporation. Can I proceed, Mr. Chairman? Mr. Chairman, can I proceed?
Yes, Congressman Lagman, you have the floor.
The issuance of a depository receipt known as American Depository Receipts has been a corporate practice in the United States since the 1920s or a century ago. Do you confirm this? This can be answered by any of the resource persons of ABS-CBN Corporation or ABS-CBN Holdings Corporation.
Mr. Chair, tama po yun.
There are also counterparts in Europe known as European Deposit Receipts. Is this correct?
That's correct.
And the reason or purpose for this practice or the issuance of depository receipts is to secure investment, not capital infusion or transfer of corporate ownership. Is this also correct?
That's correct.
In the Philippines, what triggered the issuance of PDRs?
Mr. Chair, as explained earlier by Dean Del Castillo, the first PDRs were issued during a time of financial crisis. And the PDRs allowed access to foreign investors for certain Philippine enterprises which were otherwise restricted. So the PDRs allowed foreigners an economic interest only in certain Philippine investments that they would not have otherwise been allowed to directly invest in.
That is correct. That was already mentioned previously by Attorney Del Castillo. And this practice of PDRs in the Philippines, just to restate, was the effect of the 1997 Asian financial crisis, because the traditional sources of financing or investments had been eroded, so much so there was a need to attract investors not only from the Philippines but other countries. Is that correct?
That's correct.
I am informed that in 1988, PLDT issued similar instruments known as Global Depository Receipts and later as American Depository Receipts, because the majority of the investors came from the United States or were foreigners. Is this correct?
That's correct.
Consequently, the issuance of Philippine Deposit Receipts or PDRs is not an innovation made by ABS-CBN. Is that correct?
That's correct.
In other words, this is an established corporate practice after the 1997 Asian financial crisis, so much so that other media networks are likewise issuing their own PDRs. Is this correct?
Yeah. Yes, Your Honor, that's correct.
This is known as Philippine Deposit Receipts. Why is it called deposit? What is deposited?
The underlying shares are deposited with a depositary and located in the Philippines.
It is my understanding that a Philippine deposit receipt is an investment instrument that allows the public to invest in the performance of ABS-CBN in the stock exchange. PDRs give the holder the right to receive dividends, or what is called cash distribution from the issuer, and the right to convert the PDRs to shares of stock but only if or C is qualified. Is this also correct?
Your Honor, if I could clarify, the PDR holders do not have a right to the dividends. The dividends belong to ABS-CBN Holdings, but the PDR holders have a right to cash distributions arising from the receipt of the payments of the dividends.
Okay, so these are discussed distributions are derivative or derived from dividends received by the issuer after deducting the cost of operation and other expenses. Is that correct?
Opo, that's correct, Your Honor.
In other words, PDR is an instrument of investment, not an evidence of corporate ownership. Do you confirm that?
That's correct, Your Honor.
And in fact, Your Honor, that's specifically written in the PSA rules that they are not evidence of ownership.
I will go to that. We will have to cite the necessary documents. Section 11(1) of Article 16 of the Constitution provides that, and I quote, the ownership and management, underscoring ownership and management of mass media shall be limited to citizens of the Philippines or to corporations, cooperatives, or associations fully owned and managed by such citizens. Under this provision, the 100% Filipino requirement refers to 1, ownership, and 2, management of mass media. Is this correct?
That's correct, Your Honor.
PDRs are not invested with or entitled of voting rights and full beneficial ownership. Is that correct?
That's correct. They are only entitled to cash distributions and the proceeds of the sale. All other rights of a stockholder belong to the PDR issuer.
Consequently, PDR holders are not owners of ABS-CBN, and they do not participate in the management of ABS-CBN. Is that correct?
That's exactly correct, Your Honor.
So, the issuance of PDRs is completely legal and constitutional, and there is no circumvention of the requirement of 100% Filipino ownership and management of mass media. Is that correct?
That's correct, Your Honor. The SEC has approved all issuances of PDRs of ABS-CBN.
And a PDR is not equivalent to a shareholding. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Is the issuance of a PDR akin to a pledge?
Not exactly, Your Honor, but the issuance of a PDR represents a contractual obligation to deliver cash distributions arising from the underlying shares. That contractual obligation is secured by a pledge over the underlying shares.
So it is a pledge. And then we all know that in a contract of pledge, the ownership of the property or asset pledge is still the pledgor and not the pledgee. Is that correct?
That is correct, Your Honor. The pledgor, ABS-CBN Holdings, continues to enjoy all the rights and privileges of the ownership of the shares.
In the case of PDRs, where the underlying shares are those of ABS-CBN Corporation who is in fact the issuer of the PDRs?
The issuer is ABS-CBN Holdings Corporation, who is the stockholder of ABS-CBN Corporation.
Then what is the relation of ABS-CBN Corporation to ABS-CBN Holding Corporation with respect to the issuance of PDRs?
There is no there's no contractual or other relationship between the PDR holders and ABS-CBN Corporation. The PDR holders only have a contractual relationship with ABS-CBN Holdings, who is the issuer of the PDRs.
The ABS-CBN Holdings Corporation is the assignee of shares of stocks of ABS-CBN Corporation, which it is liable to pay subsequently. May we know who is or who are the assigners of the shares of stock?
Your Honor, just to clarify, the question is in whose name the shares of stock are issued?
That is not the question. The question is, ABS-CBN Holdings Corporation is the assignee of shares of stocks of ABS-CBN Corporation. If there is an assignee, who is the assigner?
Your Honor, there is no assignment of shares that take place in the structure because the ownership remains with ABS-CBN Holdings. Those shares have not been assigned. They have only been used to secure its obligations under the PDR instrument.
So, how was ABS-CBN Holdings Corporation able to acquire shares of stocks of ABS-CBN Corporation over which it constituted the PDRs?
As explained earlier, Your Honor, they were bought by ABS-CBN Holdings Inc. from Lopez Inc.
Can you please repeat that answer?
The shares that are owned by ABS-CBN Holdings and used as underlying shares for the PDRs were bought by ABS-CBN Holdings from Lopez Inc.
Were what?
Lopez Inc. po. Secondary sale po ito. They were bought by the issuer from another shareholder of ABS-CBN Broadcasting Corporation.
You know, shares are transferred either as direct sale or assignment of shares subject to payment of the costs. And under what mode did ABS-CBN Holdings Corporation acquire these ABS-CBN Corporation shares of stock?
Mr. Chairman, in 1999, Lopez Inc. assigned some of its shares to ABS Holdings Corporation. And this was booked as a liability from Lopez Inc.
I think that is the correct answer. These shares were assigned by Lopez Corporation to ABS-CBN Holdings Corporation. And these assigned shares were constituted by ABS-CBN Holdings Corporation as PDRs. Now, I am informed that ABS-CBN Holdings Corporation has a small authorized capital stock. Is that correct?
That's correct, Mr. Chairman.
Under this circumstance, is there any prohibition that the ABS-CBN Holding Corporation cannot receive assignments of ABS-CBN Corporation's stock subject to the liability to pay?
Mr. Chairman, there is none.
There is none. As an assigning of the shares of ABS-CBN Corporation, is there any prohibition that ABS-CBN Holdings cannot constitute PDRs over the said assigned shares?
There is none, Mr. Chairman.
Are PDRs considered securities?
Yes, Your Honor.
Before ABS-CBN Holdings Corporation issued Philippine deposit receipts, did it secure the permit of the Securities Exchange Commission, considering that PDRs are securities?
Yes, Your Honor. They were all approved by the Securities and Exchange Commission.
Can you furnish the joint committees with a copy of that permit, which is denominated as, I quote, Certificate of Permit to Offer Securities for Sale, unquote, which more particularly reads, and I quote, this is to certify that from the date hereof, the securities of ABS-CBN Holdings Corporation, consisting of up to 272 million shares, Philippine depository receipts, have been registered and may now be issued subject to further orders of the Securities and Exchange Commission, and this is dated 4th of October 1991, signed Linda A. Nagoang, officer in charge of the Securities and Exchange Commission. Do you have a copy of that permit?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, and we have submitted a copy of that certificate of registration to the honorable committees.
May I request, Joint Chairman, for the production of that certificate of permit, and that the committee secretary of the Committee of Legislative Franchises be requested to mark the same as Annex A, ABS-CBN, open parenthesis, Philippine Depository Receipts, close parenthesis, for purposes of record.
Comsec, you're instructed to take note of the request of Congressman Lagman.
In this permit, there is reference to 272 million Philippine deposit receipts. Are these the PDRs which the SEC permitted ABS-CBN's holding to issue?
Yes, Your Honor.
In this permit, there is a colatilia reading, I quote, subject to further orders of the Securities and Exchange Commission. May we know whether there were further orders from the Securities and Exchange Commission on this matter?
There are none, Your Honor.
Was there a subsequent permit granted to ABS-CBN Holdings by the Securities Exchange Commission with respect to PDRs?
Yes, Your Honor. In 2013, there was a certificate of permit issued by the SEC.
Is that the certificate of permit to offer securities for sale dated January 7, 2014, signed on behalf of the Securities Exchange Commission by Director Vicente Graciano Felizmeño Jr.?
Yes, sir.
May I request, Joint Chairman, that this certificate of permit dated January 7, 2014 be marked by the committee secretary as Exhibit A-1, ABS-CBN PDR.
The committee secretary is hereby directed to do the markings for Representative Lagman and this committee.
This certificate of permit, which we which we requested to be marked as Exhibit A-1, refers to 57,836,900 PDRs. To what does this figure refer to?
Mr. Chairman, can question be repeated?
This certificate of permit, which we requested to be marked as Exhibit A-1, ABS-CBN, refers to 57,836,900 PDRs. Are these the PDRs which were authorized to be issued as PDRs?
Yes, Your Honor.
Were there other orders issued by the Securities and Exchange Commission with respect to this certificate of permit to offer securities for sale dated January 7, 2014?
There are none, Your Honor.
Do you have a copy of the document entitled, quote, Philippine Deposit Receipt Instrument?
Yes, Your Honor.
Does this Philippine Deposit Receipt Instrument provide for the pertinent conditions and limitations relative to the issuance of ABS-CBN of Philippine holdings of Philippine Deposit Receipts?
Yes, Your Honor.
On page 6 of this instrument, under the caption, quote, ownership of shares and voting rights, unquote, the following are provided. Quote, 4.1, pending exercise of the PDRs, subject as described below, the shares deliverable on exercise of PDRs shall be owned by and registered in the name of the issuer. And it is further provided that, and I quote, 4.3, neither the security agent nor any holder shall have voting rights with respect to the shares until an exercise of a PDR, the issuer as owner of shares underlying the relevant PDR will retain and exercise such voting rights relative to such shares. Do you confirm this?
I confirm, Your Honor.
And let me ask again whether the issuer here is the ABS-CBN Holdings Corporation.
That's correct, Your Honor.
Condition number 1.3 in this instrument provides that, and I quote, however, that if the person to whom shares are to be delivered upon exercise of a PDR is not a person to whom delivery of the shares is permitted under Philippine law, and certification that such person is permitted under Philippine law to own the shares is not obtained, the holder hereby irrevocably authorizes the issuer and the PDR agent to an issuer shall A. deliver the shares to an eligible broker together with an irrevocable instruction to effect the sale of the shares in the open market, and B. remit the net proceeds of such sale to or to the order of the holder in accordance with the exercise notice. Do you confirm this stipulation or condition in the instrument?
I confirm, Mr. Chairman.
Joint Chairman, may I request that the Philippine Deposit Receipt Instrument previously identified by the resource person be marked as Exhibit B, thus ABS-CBN, enclosed in parentheses PDR, and condition 4 be bracketed, including 4.1 4.1 and 4.3, and the same be marked as Exhibit B-1, ABS-CBN PDR, and the portion of condition 5.3 from however to exercise notice be bracketed and marked as Exhibit B-2, ABS-CBN PDR.
The committee secretary is directed to do so.
To whom does the condition, I quote, not a person to whom delivery of the share is permitted under Philippine law, refer to?
Mr. Chairman, these refer to non-Filipino citizens.
Or it refers to an alien or a foreigner who is not qualified under the Constitution and in our laws to own shares in ABS-CBN. Is that correct?
That's correct, Mr. Chairman.
Can you present a sample copy of a Philippine deposit receipt certificate?
Mr. Chairman, we already submitted a sample copy of a certificate representing a PDR.
May I request, Joint Chairman, that the sample copy of the Philippine Deposit Receipt Certificate be marked as Exhibit C, ABS-CBN PDR.
The committee secretary is directed to do so.
This sample Philippine Deposit Receipt Certificate provides that, and I quote, the PDR represented by this certificate does not, all caps, not represent shares of stock, but only confers a right to the delivery or sale of existing shares of stock of ABS-CBN Broadcast Corporation issued by the issuer under the terms and conditions stated therein and in the PDR instrument. Do you confirm this?
I confirm, Mr. Chairman.
May I request, Joint Chairman, that the said proviso reading, quote, the PDR represented by this certificate does not represent shares in stock, but only confers a right to the delivery or sale of existing shares of stock of ABS-CBN Corporation, Broadcasting Corporation, issued by the issuer under the terms and conditions stated therein and in the PDR instrument. In the sample Philippine Deposit Receipt Certificate be marked as Exhibit C-1, ABS-CBN PDR. May I request for a ruling of the Joint Chairman on the marking?
The committee secretary is directed to do so.
Has there been a PDR issued to a foreigner who has opted to convert his PDR to shares of stock of ABS-CBN Corporation, and the same has been converted in his name?
Yes, Your Honor.
Beg your pardon?
Yes, Your Honor.
Let me repeat my question. Has there been a PDR issued to a foreigner who has opted to convert his PDR to shares of stocks of ABS-CBN Corporation, and the same has been converted in his name?
Attorney, lilinawin ko lang po. Ang tanong po ni Congressman Lagman ay kung naipapangalan ba yung PDR doon sa foreigner.
No, hindi po PDR, Mr. Chairman. Yung pag nag-opt yung holder ng PDR to convert his shares, his PDR to shares of stock, meron bang nangyari na itong shares of stock ay linagay sa pangalan ng foreigner?
Hindi.
Okay.
Wala po.
ABS-CBN.
Wala po. Sorry, Your Honor.
Is it possible for a foreigner who holds a PDR to exercise the option to convert this PDR to shares of stocks of ABS-CBN Corporation, and the conversion is registered in the name of said foreigner?
Hindi po papayagan yan.
And you are assuring the joint committees under oath that this has never happened,
Yes, Your Honor.
that no PDR has been converted into shares of the stocks of ABS-CBN Corporation in the name of a foreigner.
Yes, Your Honor.
In other words, the issuance of a PDR to a foreign investor does not dilute the 100% Filipino ownership and management of ABS-CBN Corporation. Is that correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
Now, are you aware of the case of Gamboa versus Tebes, GR number 176579, October 9, 2012?
Yes, Your Honor.
And in this case, the Supreme Court ruled that, and I quote, full beneficial ownership of the stocks coupled with appropriate voting rights is essential. Capital in Section 11, Article 12 of the 1987 Constitution refers to shares with voting rights as well as with full beneficial ownership. This is precisely because the right to vote in the election of directors, coupled with full beneficial ownership of stock, translate to effective control of a corporation. This decision is descriptive of the real essence of a PDR because it does not entitle the holder to voting rights and full beneficial ownership. Do you agree to this?
I agree, Your Honor.
Remember, this decision was an interpretation of the extent of Filipino capital as mentioned in Section 11, Article 12 of the 1987 Constitution. By parity of reasoning and logic, can this decision in Gamboa versus Tebes be applied to Section 11.1